to the Drac Monster collection, and this is called The Shadow Man. Just down the country road, only a few miles, where Frank Dennison and his wife Jane lived, was a beautiful Victorian house with a for sale sign in the yard. Frank immediately pulled into the driveway to check out the house. When he saw that the house was locked, Frank wrote down the number on the for sale sign to contact the agent. Luckily, Frank was able to get in touch with him and immediately phoned the agent. Yes, the house is still on the market. I would be more than happy to show it to you. The owner wants a quick sale and will certainly work with you to make your dream come true, if you both are truly serious about buying, said the realtor. How about tomorrow at 2 p.m., Frank asked eagerly. That'll be fine. See you then, replied the agent. Frank called Jane and let her know about the appointment. The next day they met the real estate agent. They must be asking a pretty penny for this house, Jane said as she gazed upon the massive estate. The house seemed too good to be true, and they were both excited about the home. What they didn't know were specific details about the house that the owner had purposefully left out. The owner didn't want them to know that a ghost by the name of Shadow Man supposedly haunted the place. He feared they might become discouraged, just like all the others who had expressed interest. Some took the owner's advice. Others did not and met an untimely end at the hands of the Shadow Man. The owner had learned his lesson this time, however. He was not going to make the same mistake he had made with the other interested buyers. The old Victorian home sat on 60 acres of flat land with a vast lake, not too far from the back of the house. The house was tall and eccentrically beautiful. The home also had a wraparound porch which added additional charm to the estate. It was indeed the house of their dreams, and this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Jane was in awe of the astounding beauty of the home and gave her husband a huge hug. I love it. I love it. When can we move in? Jane asked with a smile. We need to fill out the appropriate documents and make an offer. If the seller accepts the offer, you and your husband should be able to move in by the end of next week. Now, if you'll both follow me to the study, we will sit down and discuss the asking price of the home. I'll give the owner a call and hopefully he will accept, said the realtor. The realtor phoned the owner and told him what the Dennisons were willing to give for the house. The seller hesitated for a moment. Their offer is a little lower than my asking price, the owner said to himself, but if I don't accept their offer, I'll be stuck with the house. He decided to accept their offer and hung up the phone. The realtor flashed a big smile at the Dennisons. Congratulations, you're now the proud owners of this beautiful Victorian mansion. The owner will have all of the things out by Friday. You'll be able to begin moving in by Monday. If you don't have any further questions, we'll go ahead with signing the legal documents and collect your down payment and closing costs, and after all that, I'll hand over the keys to your new home. The Dennisons shook hands with the realtor gleefully and drove off. They decided to celebrate at a nice restaurant. When we're through eating, I was wondering if we'd like to go and see a movie with me. We can call it a night. If you like, though, Jane asked her husband. I think that's a good idea, honey. We'll need to get a babysitter for Matthew and Sarah first, he replied. After the movie, they went to a local cafe for some coffee to talk some more about their new home. Darling, I've never lived in a mansion before, Jane said. Don't you worry, Frank replied. I've never lived in one either, but I'm sure we'll adjust fine. I think we'd better head home and get some sleep. We can pack our things in the morning, said Frank reassuringly. After they paid for the drinks, Mr. and Mrs. Dennison got in their car and drove home. As they pulled into the driveway, Frank remarked, just think, in a few more days, we'll be driving to our new home. The day of the move finally came, and the Dennisons were eager to live in their new house. The previous owner was equally as excited about the move. They packed their furniture and clothes into the moving van and headed towards their destination. Moving in was easy until night fell. The Shadow Man made his presence known. At first, there were noises like footsteps and bottles smashing against the wall. During the daytime, the children played near the barn, and when they glanced over and saw a figure opening the door. Before he entered, he turned around with blazing red eyes and told the children to leave, or the Shadow Man will get them. The children ran in so fast in the house to tell their mother what they saw. Mummy, Mummy, there's a man in the barn that told us to leave or the shadow man will get us. Their mother told them it was just the handyman they hired yesterday playing tricks on them. Jane pretended to get her days mixed up. So she easily just laughed it off. Go back outside and play. We'll have a talk with Mr. Nelson and about his pranks. Okay, Mummy, the children replied. As the children ran back outside to play, there was a knock at the door. When Jane opened the door, she found Mr. Nelson ready for work. Mrs. Dennison, sorry, I'm late. I had a flat tire about a mile down the road and thumbed a ride to the nearest gas station to get it fixed. It won't happen again, I promise. What did you just say? Mrs. Dennison asked anxiously. I said I had a flat tire and had to hitch a ride to get it fixed. Mr. Nelson replied with a confused look on his face. Then, who is the man at the barn that told my son to leave? Or the shadow man would get us all? Asked the mother nervously. Whiskey Six, that's his name, Mr. Nelson explained. A legend had it that when he drank too much whiskey, someone was going to die. Whether it be during a poker game or a fight over a woman or a stagecoach robbery, anyone who dared to ride shotgun with him might not come back alive. Whiskey Six's blood ran as cold as ice. If I were you, I would sell the house as soon as possible and never return. I'll let you in a little secret. The owner didn't tell you about the house. In the real house, estate, documents. Whiskey Six was born in this house and died in it. Mr. Nelson leaned in closer and continued. It all started when Whiskey Six's father lost his job and started drinking heavily. Whiskey Six thought his dad was the roughest and toughest outlaw the West had ever known. That was, of course, until a stagecoach robbery went wrong, and he was killed, one of the most notorious outlaws of them all, James Lynch of the Lynch Brothers gang. It only took 2 days to find Whiskey Six's father. When they did, they threw a rope around the beam in the barn, tied it round his neck, and hung him high. The next morning, Whiskey Six went searching for his father and stumbled upon his lifeless body hanging in the barn. Whiskey Six was furious and made a vow to avenge his father's death. He was only 16 years old at the time. Whiskey Six got his father's six-shooter and would practice day and night for weeks on end until his nerves were steel. Then he began to hunt for the Lynch brothers to finish them all off one by one. Whiskey Six got a good lead in the local saloon from a bartender named Sam. He told him the Lynch brothers were staying at a farmhouse about half a mile from the bar. The brothers broke into the farmhouse, lynched the owners in the barn just as they had done to Whiskey Six's father. Whiskey Six got on his horse and raced to the farmhouse to finish the three brothers off with his six-shooter. He tied his horse to a tree about 100 yards from the farmhouse. He pulled out his whiskey bottle and guzzled it down. He wiped the last drop from his mouth and walked up to the side of the farmhouse. Whiskey Six crept up to the window and peered inside. Sure enough, all three brothers were sitting round the table, playing poker and drinking heavily. He knew this was his best chance to get them all at the same time. Whiskey Six kicked in the door, drew both six-shooters from his holsters and started shooting. 2 brothers were shot right in the head, but the third was shot in the shoulder, pretended to be dead. Whiskey Six assumed they were all dead, so he immediately left. He got on his horse and rode back to his farmer's farmhouse and fell fast asleep in his favourite chair. Well, the remaining Lynch brother got up off the floor to check on his 2 brothers, Johnny and Billy. He realised they were both dead, and he was alone. He stood up, put his hat to his heart, and said goodbye for the last time. He made a vow that he would track down their killer and lynch him, just like all the others. Bobby stormed out the door and he proceeded to the stable to mount his horse and began to hunt. Bobby stopped by the saloon where Whiskey Six frequented. Bobby knew that if he lost his temper, the poker players Whiskey Six played with wouldn't give him any information about what he was going to do after the game. So, Bobby calmly approached the table that Whiskey Six played, and he pulled up a chair. He asked the boys if they would like a drink. Of course they said yes. Bobby yelled out their orders. The drinks kept coming. Many drinks later, he had them exactly where he wanted them. Whiskey Six is a pretty good player, Bobby said. They all nodded in agreement. You wouldn't happen to know what Whiskey Six was planning on doing after the game, would you? Bobby asked the boys slyly. They were all pretty drunk by now and didn't care what they said, so they were easy prey. Little did the men know that Bobby was one of the Lynch brothers. He had disguised himself before entering the saloon, and one of the guys at the table told him Whiskey Six had a bone to pick with the Lynch brothers and was going to avenge his father's death. Well then, boys, I think it's time for me to go visit a friend. A close friend, Bobby said as he got up from the table. He walked out of the saloon and mounted his horse. Bobby rode towards Whiskey Six's farm to take care of their unfinished business. He stopped just a few yards from the house, tied his horse to a tree. Bobby got his rope loaded, his pistols, and slowly, approaching the window of the house, he saw Whiskey Six passed out in his rocking chair by the fire, whiskey bottle in hand. Bobby slowly opened the door and quietly approached Whiskey Six, then drew his pistol and shot him in both legs. Then he put a rope around his body and dragged him to the barn. Bobby threw the line around the rafter, put the noose around Whiskey Six's neck. He kicked the chair out from under him, and after a few jerking motions, Whiskey Six's lifeless body swayed from the rafter. Just before Bobby walked away, he said, "That was for my brothers." And that's the story of the Shadow Man, and why he still haunts the farmhouse and the barn, said Mr. Nelson. Mrs. Dennison told her husband the story, and about what the Shadow Man had told their children. If what you say is true, then this is why the owner was so eager to sell the farm at such a low price, Mr. Dennison replied. Mr. Dennison called his realtor and told him his family would be moving out the next day, even if they had to take the loss. His family's life was more valuable than dream home. Are you sure you won't change your mind? The realtor said. Let someone else face the Shadow Man, Frank said. Maybe they can remove the ghost from this place once and for all, said Frank in a nervous tone. The end. And that is the end of the Shadow Man. Thank you so much for listening. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you're not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, to the Drac von Stoller collection. This is called The Red Room. Darren and his family had just gotten back from vacation when they received a phone call from Darren's aunt, Matilda. Darren, your Uncle Henry was found dead in the wine cellar. I need you to come by the mansion and help me straighten out my affairs. You're the only one I can trust with this matter. I hope your family doesn't mind if you come stay with me for a while until I get all this sorted, said Aunt Matilda. I'll talk it over with my wife tonight. I don't anticipate any problems. Get some rest. I'll be there in the morning to start the process, said Darren. I feel so much better knowing that you'll be helping me out. I know your Uncle Henry would have wanted it that way. He was always proud of your accomplishments and cared about you so much that he wanted you to have the mansion, should he ever leave us. What do you think about that, Darren? Said Matilda. Before Darren had a chance to reply or say anything, she interjected. Before you say a word, there are no living relatives besides you and me, and we both know that at my age and my health, well, it would not allow me to take on such a huge task of making sure the mansion is in tip-top shape. Your family belongs here. I know this place has a horrid past, but maybe you and your family can bring some years of happiness to it. She paused for a moment. Your uncle should have never got mixed up in the occult with his father Merlin. Henry said that if we were ever to get married, that someday we'd give up his father's wicked ways. But even when we were married, he was too far in it that he didn't honour his word to me. But I was so naive and in love with him that I didn't see the secrets that he kept from me until it was too late. Since the death of your uncle, I have now discovered hidden passages in some of the rooms that I never knew existed. The red room on the east side had a large pentagram in the middle of the floor, and a table with bloodstains on it, where I only assume it was for the human sacrifices. I also noticed when I touched the walls, there was heavy padding covering them. The door was thick with blood. I would imagine the padding was done to soundproof the room, so that if any visitors came by and happened to pass the red room, they wouldn't be able to hear any screams. She hesitated. Darren, you're not going to believe this, but I found a diary Henry was keeping about all the rituals that took place inside the red room, including all the gory details. The number of people that died inside that room is inconceivable. I can't believe I knew nothing about what went on. I did notice that the door was always kept locked, but whenever I would ask the maid, she would tell me that it was kept locked because Henry and his father were working on a breakthrough invention. It would bring the family a vast fortune. They didn't want anyone to steal their secret. So, me, being the naive person that I was, I just left it at that, never brought it up again. If only I would have been the kind of wife that knew all of her husband's business, I might have been able to stop him from getting too involved and moved away from this horrid mansion. My husband may still be alive today. Matilda composed herself and continued. The damage is done. Now that Henry's father is gone too, there is no one to carry on their murderous deeds. It's all up to you, Darren, to destroy any remaining books, diaries, anything else that could conjure up an evil presence. Please hurry. I can't bear to spend another night alone in this place. I'll board the next flight to Savannah, I promise, Darren said, trying to comfort his distraught aunt. He could hear her breathe a sigh of relief. Oh, that sounds wonderful. Thank you. Her tone had turned somber. Listen, Henry always was very protective of you because he knew that you were the only true heir to the mansion. You had no idea. No one did. That your uncle had planned for you to take his place. You see, when you were a little boy, Henry would enter the Red Room as you slept and perform certain rituals that went unnoticed until his passing. I only now know because of his diary. It was written on the very last page, as if the process was complete, and it was your destiny to take over. Darren chuckled a bit. Matilda, there's no way my uncle would have the power to choose another human being's destiny. This is all hogwash, and that's all it can be. I'll prove it to you when I arrive. We'll go through each room in the mansion. I'll read all of his writings to show you that it's all just words. There's no way there's any truth in any of this. Real murders were committed in the Red Room, Darren. I have seen the blood, Matilda replied. Darren shrugged it off. Please get some rest. I'll be there before noon tomorrow. I'll put all your fears to rest once and for all when I come. Matilda took his advice and tried to sleep it off. It only took about an hour before she had fallen into a deep sleep. Suddenly Matilda's bed began shaking violently. She could hear screams coming from the Red Room. The voice of Henry and his father were telling her she would die before sunset. Matilda jumped out of bed and ran to the door, only to find that it was locked. She screamed and beat on the door, hoping that the little maid would hear her. Little did she know, the maid had already met her end. Henry's ghost came into Matilda's room and summoned her to the Red Room. Matilda rose from her bed, followed the voice to the Red Room. Henry and his father Merlin were waiting for her there. Tears were flowing down her cheeks, and her body was trembling as she inched closer to the Red Room. All she wanted to do was run out of the mansion, but Henry had total possession over her will. She took a deep breath and repeated to herself, There's no such things as ghosts. There's no ghosts in this place. There's no ghosts in this place. There's no ghosts in this place. All of a sudden, the room grew silent. Matilda slowly approached the door and turned the knob. The door opened without hesitation. Matilda slowly walked into the Red Room. As she stepped inside, Her heart was beating out of her chest. Henry and Merlin could now bury their secrets by killing Matilda. Matilda screamed at the top of her lungs and tried to run, but it was as though someone was holding her back. Matilda was fearful of what was going to happen next. Matilda's eyes were blinded by a bright light coming from the red room. The door slammed behind her, and she was never heard from again. The ghosts of Henry and Merlin left a note in Matilda's handwriting, explaining that she had to leave unexpectedly due to a family illness. The master keys to the estate were in the top drawer of the office. Matilda's letter also stated that the lawyer would be by the mansion the next day to pick up the paperwork enabling him to take over the estate the following morning. If only Darren knew what was in store for him, he would have declined the offer and auctioned off the estate to the highest bidder. Henry and Merlin wouldn't allow that to happen. The powers were too strong, even from beyond the grave. Darren was excited to be living in a mansion and was glad that he could help his aunt with all the paperwork and save her a lot of headaches. Darren said goodbye to his family, drove off to the airport, boarded his flight to Savannah, Georgia. Little did he know that the trip would change his life forever. It was the missing puzzle piece in Henry and Merlin's evil deeds. Darren's flight arrived ahead of schedule. The weather was beautiful. He gathered his belongings and loaded up his rental car and set off. The closer Darren got to the mansion, the worse the weather became. "Sure getting dark and cloudy," Darren observed. "I hope it doesn't start raining." With every mile he drove, the rain steadily beat harder. The wind blew more fiercely. Bright lightning lit up the sky. It was the worst storm he'd ever seen. Darren glanced at the rearview mirror, thought he saw something or someone in the back car seat. Seeing nothing, though, he just attempted to shrug it off, as though his mind was playing tricks on him. The storm continued getting stronger and stronger. "Just a few more miles and I'll be there," said Darren. As Darren approached the entrance, he adjusted the rearview mirror and was shocked at what he saw in the back seat. "Oh my God, it's my uncle and grandfather!" Darren shrieked. "This can't be real, can it?" "Oh, but it is," Henry replied in an eerie tone. "We've been expecting you." Darren was in utter shock. But you're both dead. I was at grandfather's funeral 5 years ago, and you, Uncle Henry, you just died 2 days ago," Darren explained in disbelief. "Don't worry," Merlin said. "We both came here to warn you that Matilda was planning to burn the mansion to the ground with you in it. She took out an insurance policy on you when you were young. She had intended to collect it now. Your Uncle Henry and I scared Matilda out of the mansion. She'll never return. Now, when you arrive at the estate, there's a letter on the desk in the study. The letter will give you all details about everything." "Yes," Merlin said with a slight chuckle. As Darren pulled into the main entrance, he turned around and observed that his uncle and grandfather were no longer there. Darren rubbed his eyes and took a second look. Sure enough, there was no one in the back seat of the car. "I must have just imagined it all," Darren mumbled to himself. "Yeah, I was daydreaming." He tried once again to shake it off. "I guess I'll get my things and check out this letter. Hopefully this won't take too long." Darren finally arrived at his uncle's estate, ready to read the letter and claim his inheritance. As Darren entered the mansion, a voice guided him to the study, where the message was lying on the desk for him to read. He picked up the letter and started reading aloud. "Dear Darren, upon my death, you are the sole heir to my estate and all of its contents. Everything has been taken care of through my lawyer. The deed to the mansion is behind the painting on the back wall of the study. There is absolutely nothing to sign. The keys are in the top drawer of the desk. There is one more thing, Darren. To keep this place, you must agree to keep the mansion in the family. Sincerely, Uncle Henry." Darren picked up the phone to call his wife. Then all of a sudden, A faint voice whispered in his ear saying, "Come to the red room," it called. Suddenly Darren's eyes were fixated on the door. The phone fell out of his hand, and he slowly walked towards the door, in a trance. Henry and Merlin were ready to begin the ritual, making Darren one of them forever. Darren opened the door to the red room and stepped into a world full of evil, deceit, and murder. The room was foggy, with bright red blood dripping from the walls and the stench of death. Darren was too deep in a trance to know what was going on. Henry's voice led him to the sacrificial table where the last ritual would be performed. The voice said, "Darren, lie on the table, repeat after me." Henry commanded, "I will carry on the family tradition at all costs, even if it leads to murder. I will carry on the family tradition at all costs, even if it leads to murder," Darren repeated in a monotone voice. Henry then cut Darren's finger and squeezed a drop of blood into a cup. Henry and Merlin then mixed in their blood with Darren's. Henry told Darren to drink from the cup to seal the family tradition. Without hesitation, Darren gulped the bloody concoction down. The mixture felt like fire racing through his veins. Merlin cast a few more spells to make sure Darren would have no way of breaking them. They ensured stronger powers for Merlin and Henry, just in case Darren needed a stronger force in the future, should anything go wrong. All Darren would have to do is summon Merlin and Henry. They would put their evil powers together to wreak havoc on anyone or anything that would get in Darren's way. "Well, I believe we're done here," Merlin concluded. "Now, Darren can rise, start fulfilling the legacy we have left behind. Having two presences on the other side, Darren and us will all be able to unite as one. We will become the unstoppable force that will bring any non-believer in his begging knees for mercy." Merlin cackled as he said this. As Darren sat upon the table, he wiped his eyes and wondered what had happened to him. "Where did I get these clothes? And what's this necklace doing around my neck? I must have been sleepwalking," Darren reasoned. He stepped off the table and was amazed at how much he felt at home in this room. Darren would not be feeling this way about the place if he was in the right state of mind. Darren even thought being dressed in black from head to toe with a pentagram necklace felt just right. As Darren opened the door to leave the red room, a voice told him to go to the cellar, and he obeyed. As Darren approached the wine rack, the voice told him to pull the bottle 3 rows down, the 4th bottle on the left side. He pulled the bottle out, and the wine rack slid into the wall. The voice told Darren to find the book of spells. He quickly found the book and blew the dust off the cover. He opened it and started reading, way into the night, with a bottle of wine by his side. He finally passed out from too much wine and hours of reading. When morning arrived, Darren raised his head from the table, and all he could think about was trying some of the spells and rituals from the book. Darren took the book upstairs to the red room and started thumbing through the pages. He glanced through the window at the garden and noticed someone was stealing flowers. "I think I can put a stop to this," Darren said with a smile. Not knowing which page to turn to, a voice whispered in his ear the suggestion of page 23. He read the title, "How to Kill a Thief in Your Garden." He thought it was surely a coincidence that the little, fit the incident entirely. I mean, it was a bit of a coincidence, right? But he used the spell anyway. As he began speaking the words, the thief in the garden started to choke. The flowers he had stolen were now inside his throat. He fell to his knees and collapsed. The garden swallowed his lifeless body deep within its soil. If any relative or authorities came by, they could search the ground all day long. They wouldn't find a sign of him. Darren didn't realise that the pages were blank, and that his Uncle Henry and Merlin were making the spells appear before his eyes. He thought he was a real sorcerer, but his powers were too weak to do something that evil. The thief in the garden was his first killing, and counting towards his strength, he still has many murders to commit before becoming a full-fledged sorcerer. A few days later, Darren's family moved into the mansion. His wife and children were in utter shock at the sight of Darren. He looked completely different. Many years went by. Many more murders took place in the Red Room. Darren's powers escalated, eventually surpassed Merlin and Henry's power. They couldn't believe how strong his skills were becoming. They both tried their hardest to take away his powers, but it was no use. All they could do was sit back and watch as Darren destroyed all the things he ever loved in life. His ways finally caught up with him, and Merlin and Henry's legacy died with him, never to be leashed out again on the earth. The mansion eventually burned to the ground because of the evil it possessed in that Red Room. The end. Thank you for listening to this wonderful tale by Drac von Stoller. I like his tales. They are different, they're short, but I like them. They're a little quirky and I like that. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the Drac von Stoller collection. This story is called Castle Drac von Stoller. Off in the distance stood a dark, desolate castle in northwestern Ireland, full of mystery and macabre, known as Castle Drac von Stoller. Anyone that would dare to talk bad about the castle would later come up missing without a trace. Costume parties were held at the castle, where ballroom dancing would also take place. Legend has it that Count Drac von Stoller impaled the great wizard, Esteban, and just as the Count was about to sink his teeth into the wizard's neck, the wizard pulled his magic wand out of his cloak, and a beam of light shot through the wand into the mirror standing in the corner. Esteban, the wizard said, as he was gasping his last breath from the impaling stake, "Count for what you've done to me. I curse you to the mirror where you will remain for all eternity, unless you can find 13 virgin maidens, impale them, and suck every drop of their precious blood from their bodies. If you fail, the mirror will be your final resting place. You only have one chance to lift the curse." As Esteban's eyes were closing, a beam of light shone through the mirror and surrounded the Count. No matter how hard the Count tried to free himself, the curse was too strong. Eventually the Count gave in, and the mirror pulled the Count inside, never to be heard from again, for over 300 years. 300 years later, an aspiring artist by the name of Dipeco was looking for a quiet place that was far away from the townspeople with many acres of land. Dipeco needed a place that would enhance his artistic abilities, where he could shine with such greats as Leonardo da Vinci and Picasso. Dipeco's dream had always been to live in a castle and paint beautiful scenery. Dipeco decided if he was going to make this happen, he'd need to sell off everything he owns, even his most valuable paintings. He took those steps. He needed to find out if there was such a castle, and if so, could he afford it? Dipeco spent a week searching the globe until finally he found the castle was for sale in Ireland. He couldn't believe the asking price for the castle was 500,000 and knew it was a steal. So he called the realtor on the phone. "Is this a misprint?" asked Dipeco. "No, the castle's a bit run down. No one's lived in it for about 300 years after the owner Count Drak von Stoller went missing, and none of the living relatives to the castle wanted it because of its evil past, said the realtor. This is just nonsense, said Tepeko. Let me tell you a little story before you brush it off as nonsense, said the realtor. Legend has it that Count Drak von Stoller was a vampire that liked to impale his victims while they were on the stake dying. Then the Count would suck every drop of blood from their neck. The Count was the fiercest vampire ever known, and no one dared keep his company if they knew what was best for them. But the Count had powers beyond our imagination that helped him lure innocent victims to his castle, only to meet an untimely death. Another legend is that the Count was in a battle with a great wizard named Esteban, and during this campaign, the Count overpowered the wizard and impaled him. Just as the Count was about to sink his fangs into the wizard's neck, the wizard reached into his cloak, pulled out a magic wand, and pointed it at the mirror, put a spell on it. As the wizard was grasping for his last breath, he did say, Count Drak von Stoller, you may have defeated me in battle, but I'll have the last laugh. I hope you enjoy your new home in the mirror. Then a beam of light shone through the mirror with force so strong, not even the Count had enough power to free himself, nor strength from the grasp. The Count eventually lost the battle with the mirror, and was sucked into it, and never to be heard from for over 300 years. The only way the Count could break the curse is to have someone willing to give him their soul. You know, they would give the soul to the Count would appear through the mirror and deliver orders. For whosoever graces his presence, bring the Count 13 virgin maidens to impale and drain of blood. The Count can leave the mirror for the impaling of each virgin maiden once a day for 13 days. Then, if these demands are met, it will be freed from the mirror. This by far is the silliest story I think I've ever heard in my life. I'll tell you what, since you can only come up with the 250, and I see how badly you would like to have this place as your painting haven, it's yours, said the realtor. This is a dream come true. I'll have enough money left over to restore the castle to the way it once was, hopefully, said Tepeko. Tepeko signed all the appropriate documents, handed over the money to the realtor, and the realtor handed him the keys and the deed. The castle is officially yours. Good luck, may peace be with you, and all of your days in the castle, said the realtor. Tepeko was so excited about owning his castle. This was a dream come true. Tepeko could finally paint the type of paintings he wanted. As Tepeko finished moving everything into the cellar, he approached the cursed mirror and removed the black cover from it. He stepped back from it, amazed at the artistry of the frame of the mirror. Tepeko was totally amazed, and he went to a utility closet to get some cleaner for the mirror and polish it, because he wanted to see its complete beauty shining through. It was getting late when all of a sudden, a voice was calling out to Tepeko. Come here. Come here. Tepeko thought he imagined things, and he was gathering his cleaning supplies. The voice was even louder. Tepeko, come to the mirror. I've got something to tell you. Tepeko said, This is crazy. A talking mirror. Tepeko slowly turned around and couldn't believe what he saw in the mirror. Oh my God. It's true about the curse. There in the mirror was Count Drak von Stoller, trapped in the mirror for over 300 years. Tepeko said, I thought it was some joke. The Count said, No, Tepeko, this is no joke. I am Count Drak von Stoller. I need you to set me free so that we can conquer the world together. All you have to do is go into town, find 13 virgin maidens so the curse can be lifted. You will receive the highest reward as my lead vampire. Each maiden must be brought back to the castle before midnight. Only one per day for 13 days for the curse to be lifted. Then I can walk free amongst the living. Tepeko, if you do this for me, the reward will be great. There's no time to waste. Now go out and find me a maiden. Tepeko did as the Count instructed. Every day, Tepeko brought the Count a virgin maiden for 13 days. The Count impaled each one before he sucked the blood from their necks. On the 13th day, the Count stepped out of the mirror and said, "Dipeko, you did very well. And when you wake in the morning, you'll be my lead vampire as I promised. Now get some rest. I'll see you in the morning." Dipeko got some rest. As he woke in the morning, he rose out of bed, went over to the mirror to see if his appearance changed, but he saw no reflection in the mirror. He said to himself, "What has happened to me?" Dipeko couldn't even remember his name or where he was. Then a knock came on the door. "Nick, are you awake?" said the Count. Nick answered, "Yes, who are you?" The voice replied, "Count Drak von Stoller. I've come to tell you there is a meeting down in the cellar. Your presence is needed." Nick followed Count Drak von Stoller down to the cellar. As they were walking towards the cellar, Nick said, "Count, I feel thirsty, and the first thing that comes to mind is blood." The Count replied, "Blood. Well, as soon as we're in the cellar, everyone in the meeting will get a tall glass of blood, and we will all celebrate the birth of our most feared vampire army on the face of this earth." They both entered the cellar and sat down at the table. The Count said, "Now that everyone is here, I would like to introduce each member of the Count Drak von Stoller's army of vampires. The newest member and the reason we're all together is because of Nick Mondrell. If he wouldn't have brought these beautiful maidens to me, then this would not be possible. So now, I propose a toast to Nick. Raise your glasses of blood, everyone. May our army of vampires prosper and take control of the whole earth." Everyone raised their glasses of blood and drank up. Now let me introduce you to the rest of the vampires. Right, Rachel, Miranda, Isabel, Kali, Lamia, Lilith, Buta, Shidip, Sharon, Pontik, Esemi, Shivateto, and Sukyan, said the Count as he smiled. The Count said that he researched the most feared female vampires, and when the 13 maidens were transformed into vampires, the Count gave them all names and powers that these vampires possessed when they reigned over their country during their period. "We have been called to this meeting because we're going to do something no other vampire has ever done. Before us, that becomes an army of vampires that is and will take over the earth in 666 days. In the past, vampires were feared, but not enough to threaten the extinction of human race. Vampires seek out humans at night for their blood, sucking every drop of blood, resulting in their death. Then the vampire returns to their place of rest, a coffin, and sleeps during the day. Then the cycle starts all over again and again. By becoming an army of vampires, we're going to infect each human with our blood, not just enough to make them a vampire. Then, their mission is to spread the vampire's curse until every human being on this earth becomes one of us, and our deed is done, and we can celebrate a victory for the Prince of Darkness," said Drak von Stoller. "I've waited a long time for this, and I will be King of Darkness and rule the earth. I plan to take over Northwestern Ireland first. Then we'll branch out to the east and southern parts of Europe. Once we've transformed every human being into vampires, we will take over one continent at a time. Till the whole earth is vampire's world," reiterated the Count. Count Drak von Stoller's army of vampires was able to take over the whole world in 666 days, and the Count crowned King of Vampires. No more would the Count have to be imprisoned in the mirror for all eternity. Nick Mordrell was living the dream he had always wanted for many years, but couldn't achieve it until he met with Count Drak von Stoller and formed the most notorious blood-sucking, impaling vampire army there ever was. Nick eventually married Isabella, and the Count gave Castle Drak von Stoller as a wedding gift to Nick and Isabella to raise their vampire babies to be heirs to continue their legacy. The Count went on to build a new castle with a vampire training school, so young vampires would learn the history of how vampires came and what it took to conquer the human race. The end. Though that is a very interesting story indeed, and it really is, I'd like to add that if they turned everybody into vampires in the whole world, what were they going to drink? Were they just going to drink animal blood then? And couldn't they just done that in the first place? I mean, that's just me thinking logically on the story here, but it's still a good story nonetheless. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the Drakbon Stoller Stories. So this one's called Captain Bloody Bones. Captain Johnny Bones loved to sail the seven seas with some of the roughest shipmates that ever sailed. Captain Johnny Bones' ship was called Bloody Bones because every ship that crossed its path would be a bloody mess. When Captain Johnny Bones got through the crew, there would be nothing left but bloody bones. When Captain Johnny Bones and his shipmates came aboard, they stole all of the gold aboard and would slit every crew member's throats and watch their jugular veins squirt blood on the other dead bodies. Just before Captain Johnny Bones and his men would climb aboard their ship, Bloody Bones, they would roast the dead men's hearts over their burning bodies and eat their hearts to show that Captain Johnny Bones and his men were the toughest pirates in the sea. Very few men in Captain Johnny Bones' ship would ever backtalk him. If they did, they would either walk the plank or have their heads cut off, and a rope would be threaded through both ears, then tied above their head, and the head would hang a couple of feet along the side of the ship. One of the pirates dare come alongside Captain Johnny Bones' boat and see all the severed heads along the bottom of the vessel. That was enough to make any pirate ship retreat and head back home. Captain Bones had a big ego and would love to attack any ship in its path, friendly or not. Regardless if another pirate ship was nearby, it was sure Captain Bones would fire upon that ship, so there was no avoiding the Bloody Bones ship at any cost. Captain Bones liked to let his crew board the enemy ship and completely subdue them, and then one of his men would wave a shirt on a stick for the captain to come aboard and enter the enemy's captain's quarters, where his men would have the captain tied to a chair. Captain Bones would slit the captain's throat and then cut the captain's heart out and eat it, while blood was dripping down his mouth, and shout out to his men and say, "Who's the roughest and toughest pirate of the sea?" And his men would answer, "Captain Johnny Bones." Captain Johnny Bones' men shouted, "Captain Johnny Bones, why don't you change your name to Captain Bloody Bones? Because you're the most bloodthirsty pirate of them all." Captain Johnny Bones said, "I like it. I like it." As the men gathered up the enemy's gold, all the dead men's bodies were placed in a pile and set on fire, and their hearts were cut out and eaten by Captain Bloody Bones and his men. Captain Bloody Bones and his men ruled the seas for many years, until most of Captain Bloody Bones' men started dying from eating all those bloody hearts. Captain Bloody Bones' crew was down to mere 7 men, including the captain himself. And to find men as rough and tough as his crew was his chance of finding anyone else, well, this was slim to none. Captain Bones and his men were sitting ducks out in the lonely sea. His ship was sailing through the lonely seas for months without an enemy in sight. I mean, he usually fought pirate ships weekly, but since he wasn't feared anymore, ships would pass by and laugh. The end was near for Captain Bones and his men, because a new pirate named Captain Sabertooth wanted Captain Bloody Bones and his ship sunk. Captain Sabertooth got his name because whenever his men would take a ship over and eat gold, Captain Sabertooth would cut out the enemy's teeth while they were still alive for souvenirs. The next day, as the not-so-rough and most robust pirates of the sea were looking for an easy ship to take over, Captain Bloodybone's ship happened to cross paths with Captain Sabertooth's boat. Captain Sabertooth and his crew outnumbered Captain Bloodybone's men 3-1. So Captain Bloodybones and his men didn't stand a chance, because at least 3 out of the 7 men of his men were deathly ill. Captain Sabertooth's ship fired up Captain Bloodybone's ship, rendering it useless. Captain Sabertooth boarded Captain Bloodybones' boat and killed all 6 men in front of Captain Bloodybones. Captain Bloodybones watched as Captain Sabertooth cut out his men's teeth while they lay there screaming in agony. And there's nothing that the Captain Bloodybones could do but watch. Well, well. I finally get to meet the roughest, toughest, bloodthirsty pirate of the sea. Guess what? Looks like you're not so tough after all, Captain Sissybones. It looks like my men did a good job finishing off the rest of your crew, and I've got 6 more sets of teeth to add to my collection. Did I say 6? 6. I mean to say 7 sets of teeth. I didn't mean to leave you out, Captain Sissybones. Sorry. I meant to say Captain Johnnybones, because the captain always goes down with his ship, just like you will once I remove your teeth, said Captain Sabertooth. Captain Tooth's men held Captain Bones down on the deck and cut out Captain Bones' teeth and gathered all of Captain Bloodybones' gold from his ship. Captain Sabertooth set Captain Bloodybones' ship, the Bloodybones, on fire and climbed back aboard his ship. Sabertooth watched Captain Bloodybones' ship and all of its men sink to the bottom of the sea. Captain Sabertooth and his men would be the most feared pirates of the sea for many years to come, until the next roughest and the most robust pirate ship would cross their path and take over the sea, just like many of the pirates before them. And that's the life of a pirate. Be tough for as long as you can, because the day will come when there's someone bigger and better. Thank you for listening to this story. I truly appreciate it. Please hit that like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the Drakbon Stoller collection. This story is called Campfire Tales. We had just gotten back from the Halloween party when John, being the only non-believer in ghosts, asked Karen and me if the stories about many sightings of spirits in the old ghost town were true. Of course, we said they were all true, and of course, his response was, these stories are just a bunch of made-up stuff. They keep nosy people from vandalizing the old town. Well, if it's not true, then why don't all of us camp out tonight at the ghost town and put these old stories to the test once and for all? I replied. I told John that I would get my tent and some blankets. Karen volunteered to bring food and flashlights, and John said he would bring some firewood, beer, and his guitar. I decided we would all ride together in my car. Everyone was very excited. We're telling our friends at school all about our spooky tales when we get back. But little did we know, there would be no tales to say because we would never be heard from again. As we were driving down the dusty country road, John was strumming on his guitar as we all sang along joyfully. We were having the time of our lives, just being together because we were such good friends. Just up ahead of us was a man in the middle of the road on a horse. Slow down, Karen exclaimed. I immediately slammed on the brakes. John doesn't scare easily. But this man on the horse in the middle of this dark, deserted road gave John the willies. The closer we got to the mounted figure, the more frightened we all became. But we just kept driving. We blamed it on the beer. We were drinking and we just proceeded towards the ghost town. We couldn't face all of our friends the next day and say, well, we were too scared to camp out there. We would be the laughing stock of the school. So we continued onwards. As we approached the entrance to the town, the car stalled. We were not going to walk back home, since it was too far, and we didn't want to end up running for our lives from that mysterious man on the horse. So we gathered our belongings and crossed through the entrance. We turned on our flashlights, looked for a safe place to camp, just for the night. Where did that man on the horse go? Karen asked as we walked. Who knows and who cares? John replied quickly. All of a sudden, the mounted figure appeared, charged full steam ahead in our direction. The figure's eyes were as red as fire. We all froze in our tracks. The figure rode right through us, as if we were the ghosts. It was enough to turn a skeptic into a believer. I told everyone to get our cell phones out, call our parents to come pick us up, but none of our phones would get a signal. Well, looks like we're stuck here for the night. We may as well make the best of it, said John. This looks like a good place to pitch a tent, right next to the saloon and bank, I replied. John placed the firewood on the ground, tried to get the fire started while Karen and I got the tent set up. We all gathered around the campfire to keep warm and sang a few songs, lighten the mood. Karen decided, after a while, we should tell some stories about the old ghost town. All right. Who wants to tell their story first? Karen asked excitedly. John put his guitar down, took another gulp of beer and said, Since I'm the biggest skeptic, I'll tell my story first. My father told me this tale when I was a little boy. You see, my father's grandfather used to be sheriff in this ghost town, and would always run into trouble with some of the gunslingers. That was especially true with a man nicknamed Six Gun Jones. Every time Six Gun Jones drank too much whiskey while playing poker, someone ended up dead. When Six Gun lost the game, he would tip the table over and shoot every player in the head. He'd grab up all the money, run out of the saloon, jump on his horse and ride out of town, until one day the sheriff had had enough. This time, I'll be ready and waiting to shoot him in both legs, the sheriff said. I'll drag him out to the saloon and hang him high in the middle of the town. Sure enough, Six Gun Jones was back in the town with his whiskey in one hand and his six gun in the other. Everyone scattered about the saloon as Six Gun took a swig of whiskey. He shot his gun in the air and said, Let's play some poker, boys! After a few rounds of poker and whiskey, losing every hand, he threw his whiskey bottle down and flipped the table over. He was getting ready to shoot every player in the head, make his getaway with the money, but little did he know that one of the players was the sheriff in disguise. The sheriff drew his guns, shot Six Gun in both of his legs, before he even got his hand to his weapon. Six Gun Jones fell to the floor, begging for help. The sheriff came over, just as he planned to do, dragged Six Gun out of the saloon. He took him to the gallows and hung Six Gun for all the killings in the town he committed. After John had finished, it was Karen's turn. So what's your story? He asked. My story dates a few years before yours, Karen said. The town had just struck gold, and the people were pleased and enjoying life. That is until Tombstone Willie came to town and tore it all apart. Willie was a very selfish and mean man who stood about 6 feet 6 inches tall. I hope you all don't have a weak stomach, because this story is pretty gruesome. It all started on a dusty day when Tombstone got into a fight with another man over a woman. Tombstone said to the man, Let's go outside the saloon and finish this. No guns, just fists. The man agreed and followed him outside. Little did he know that this would be his last fight. Tombstone reared back and threw the first punch. He struck him so hard that the man spun around, hit the ground, and passed out. Tombstone ran one of his spurs from the top of the man's head to the bottom of his leg and dragged him behind the saloon. Tombstone dug him a shallow grave and buried his lifeless body. The next day, he returned with an headstone to mark the grave of his first kill. That was how Tombstone Willie got his nickname. He went on to kill about 10 of the townspeople, and the name just stuck. I'm sure you would like to know what happened to Tombstone Willie. Well, one day was burying a man behind the saloon, and a horse came alongside him. Before Tombstone Willie turned around to see who it was, one of the fathers of his victims was on the horse, swinging his lasso above his head. He threw it around Tombstone Willie's neck and dragged his lifeless body out of town. The enraged father cut off Tombstone Willie's head and buried the body. To this day, no one knows what happened to Tombstone Willie's head. At this point, I was shaking in my boots by the tails. Well, guys, I'm not sure if I can top your stories, but I'll give it a try. This outlaw I'm about to tell you about is horrible too. He goes by the name of Lasso Bill, and if he catches you cheating at poker, you're a dead man. On one rainy night, Lasso Bill entered the saloon, ready to play some poker. He needed some money to eat on since he didn't have much money. Lasso Bill was pretty good at poker and never cheated. To him, there was nothing better than winning big. The Kingston clan are notorious for cheating and didn't care what the townspeople thought of them. It just so happened that on this day, Lasso Bill decided to play against the clan. While they were playing, Lasso Bill noticed one of the Kingston brothers sliding an ace under his cards, and he knew something was up. Lasso Bill was getting dealt one bad hand after another, so he slammed his cards down on the table and yelled, "No one, I mean no one, cheats Lasso Bill out of money." The Kingston clan just sat back and laughed at his threats. "You think it's funny? I'll show you funny." He quickly pulled both 6-shooters out and shot the cheating clan to death. Lasso Bill kicked the table over, got out of his chair, grabbing his lasso from the floor. He pulled the bullet-filled bodies of Kingston clan together and swung his lasso around in the air until it slipped over their corpses. Lasso Bill pulled the rope tight and dragged the boys out of the saloon, tied the rope around to his horse and rode out of town. He went all the way to the top of the hill and buried the brothers. When word got out about what Lasso Bill had done, he was the town's hero. That's my story. I know my tale had a happy ending, but Lasso Bill was still a fearless outlaw during the old western days. "Hey, John, did you hear something?" said I. "Yes," Karen and John exclaimed at the same time. "It's the man on the horse, with the fiery red eyes. This time he's not alone." "It can't be. No, it can't be. Please don't hurt us. We're only camping out and telling stories about the old ghost town. We mean no harm." "No, no, no." The next morning, the school was in progress. The roll was called. John, no answer. Karen, no answer. Mike, no answer. Only a charred campfire, untouched tent, and broken down car remained. No trace of John, Karen and Mike were ever found to this day, and no one knows what really happened. The end. Thank you for listening to this Drakmonster story. I truly appreciate it. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria, energy, twister. Wisteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the Drakmonster collection. This story is called Planchette. During the 1800s, the planchette was a popular game in the parlours which consisted of a board of wood with a pencil attached and 2 wheels. Then, the curious players would place the tips of their fingers on the board of wood, and if they were lucky, the spirits would guide the movement of their hands, creating words on the paper directly underneath the board. Now that we know the meaning of the phrase planchette, this is where the story begins. Karen Vicelli and John Deadman were curious about the legend of the Talbot family's misfortunes surrounding the game planchette that became a family tradition on stormy nights. But their family tradition was about to take a tragic turn for the worse that would cause each family member to have to pay with their own lives for conjuring up a demonic presence. Karen and John were both determined to find the planchette game at the Talbot mansion. Legend has it that after the last Talbot family member died, one of the servants at the castle either tried to destroy the game by tossing it into the fireplace, or hid it somewhere in the mansion, or possibly the family crypt. The most bizarre thing is that each family member's body was drained of blood. Their eyes were missing. Karen said, John, if we were to find the planchette game, we could stand to make a lot of money and become famous. Just think, if there are bloodstains on the game, wow, that would be awesome. Don't you think so, John? Sure, that sounds great, but that's not going to happen to us. We're never that lucky, said John. John, don't be such a doubting Thomas. Who knows? This might be the break we're looking for to get us out of the dumps we're living in, said Karen. My hunch is, and doesn't quote me on this, but I think the planchette game is somewhere in the family crypt. What do you think? Karen asked. John replied, I think the game's in the mansion somewhere in a secret passageway and leading to another secret room that only Mr. Talbot knew about. Well, since we think the game's in two different places then, John, you search the mansion and I'll search the family crypt, said Karen. Sounds good to me, said John. John and Karen got their flashlights, and as they both were headed off to their destination, Karen said, John, let's meet back at the study in the mansion with our findings around midnight. John, my watch says 6 o'clock. Let's not waste any more time. I can't wait until our friends see our story in the newspaper. I can count those Benjamins now, said Karen. Don't count so fast. We haven't found one piece of evidence right now, said John. Don't you worry. One of us is bound to find something. Just have a little faith, said Karen. Okay, fine. I'll do as you say. Who knows? You may be right, said John. See you around midnight, Karen. Good luck, John, said Karen. As Karen and John headed off to their destinations, the only thing that their friends would be reading about in the newspaper is two teenage kids reported missing without a trace. If the Talbots didn't survive the demonic presence that drained them of all their blood and eyes missing, what makes John and Karen think they're the ones to solve the mystery surrounding the planchette game? As John was exploring in the mansion, he said to himself, if I were Mr. Talbot, the best place to have a secret passageway would be in the study behind one of the bookcases. John headed down the stairs to the study. And just as his foot touched the last step, he heard what sounded like a low-pitched demonic voice telling him to get out or he would die. The voice was so faint that he just thought he heard things and just pressed towards the study, hoping he would be the one, not Karen, that finds the planchette game and get all the credit for solving the mystery. As John's hand clutched the door handle, the door flung open, and a force pushed John into the study. The door slammed shut. John doesn't scare so easily, but this got John a little scared, and he was starting to think that maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. But John was in too deep, and there was no turning back. The demonic voice led John to the bookcase, where the secret passage indeed was. John paused for a moment and said, maybe I'm hearing things because Karen and I had a little too much to drink just a couple of hours ago. But I could have sworn that a strange voice led me to this bookcase. John shook his head and started pulling books out from the shelves, thinking this would open the secret passage behind the bookcase, but to no avail. The demonic voice intervened and told John to turn the candle holder on the wall to the right, and this would open the bookcase, exposing the secret passage to Mr. Talbot's mysterious past. Just as the voice instructed John, the bookcase opened, and as he turned, the candle on the wall too. John just froze and couldn't believe he heard a voice that, well, told him the secret, led him to the secret, to the passage in Mr. Talbot's study. John entered with caution, but knew time was at hand and didn't want to come out empty. John turned on his flashlight and went into Mr. Talbot's secret room. As John got further inside the room, the door slammed shut, and the bookcase closed as tight as a coffin. That didn't scare John, because his mind was set on finding the planchette game. As John searched and searched for the game, he shined his flashlight where the painting on the wall was hanging and lifted the art off the wall and noticed a wall safe was behind the picture. This has to be where the game was hidden all of those years, said John. Again, the demonic voice told John the combination to the safe, and so he turned the knob to the right to 6, then back to the left to 6, then back to the right to 6. John had no idea the combination the demonic voice had told him was just the mark of the beast, 666. John turned the handle on the safe and heard a click. Then the safe opened up, and lo and behold, a piece of puzzle both John and Karen had been searching for was right before his eyes. John reached in and pulled out a piece of paper that was part of the game. Planchette, just as Karen envisioned, and bloodstains were present on the paper. John's heart was pounding out of his chest, and he said to himself, I can't wait to show this to Karen. She'll probably drop to her knees. But if we don't find the pencil and wood piece, we need that. It's not completed without it. Then this bloodstained piece of paper simply means nothing. John rolled up the bloodstained paper and clutched it in his hand and hurried back to the secret passage door to show Karen what he'd found. But little did John know that Karen wouldn't get the chance to celebrate what they both longed to see. Meanwhile, Karen was searching in the Talbots' family crypt for any clue that would lead her to the planchette game. Just as Karen was about to give up, her eyes were fixated on Mr. Talbot's coffin, and she said to herself, there's no way he would have buried the secret along with him, would he? Karen glanced over in the corner by one of the family's crypt and noticed a rusty crowbar lying on the floor. Karen rushed over with excitement and picked up the crowbar and clutched it in one hand and hurried back to Mr. Talbot's crypt. Karen raised the crowbar and said, Please let me find the planchette game inside Mr. Talbot's coffin. Karen wedged the crowbar between the top of the concrete slab and had just enough strength to pry open Mr. Talbot's coffin. A pillar of smoke surrounded Karen's body. That was a demonic presence. But Karen was too excited about finding the planchette game that nothing was going to get in her way. Karen's eyes just about popped right out of her head when she looked down and seen what was Mr. Talbot's hands. Oh my God, I can't believe what I see. It's the wooden piece and pencil that goes to the planchette game. Wait a minute, something is missing. A paper. It's got to be in here somewhere. Karen was looking everywhere inside Mr. Talbot's coffin, but to no avail. There was no sign of any blood-stained paper. Then all of a sudden, a force lifted Karen off the ground and threw her body into the tomb where Mr. Talbot's dead body resides. Karen was screaming to the top of her lungs, pleading to let her out. But the demonic presence wouldn't allow that to happen. The smoke that surrounded Karen entered Mr. Talbot's body, causing Mr. Talbot's dead body to come alive. The demonic voice in Mr. Talbot's dead body said, Karen, you didn't think it would be that easy to walk away with Mr. Talbot's planchette game, now did you? Karen was trying to break the hold of the demon's grip, but it was no use. Then Mr. Talbot's eye sockets were glowing bright red, and Karen couldn't look away from the glowing red eyes. Karen's blood-curdling screams could not be heard from the outside world. Karen's eyes were burning out of their sockets until there were no more. Then Karen's lifeless body went numb, and the demon proceeded to drain Karen's blood from her body. John finally arrived with the good news to share with Karen, but it was too late. She was dead. As John approached the crypt where Karen's lifeless body was lying inside Mr. Talbot's coffin, he shouted, Karen, get out of the coffin! Get out! I've got some good news to share with you. There was no response from Karen. And then John shook her body, with not as much as a whimper. John turned her body over slowly and said, No, no. What have you done to Karen? Where are her eyes? No, no, no. The demonic voice answered, They're mine now. and I drained all of the blood like the rest of the Talbot family members. That, let me say, was pleasing, and all should have left me well alone, the demonic voice said. Mr. Talbot used a planchette game to summon up one of his ancestors that sold his soul to the devil, thinking this would make him immortal. But I am the demon, and I didn't want to be disturbed. So this is what happened to Mr. Talbot and his family, and Karen. Now that you know the secret, you will soon join Karen and the Talbot family in the crypt for eternity. Mr. Talbot's demon-possessed body leaped out of the coffin, blood dripping from its mouth that came from Karen's body, grabbed John with a grip of steel. Again, as was done to Karen, the demon stared into John's eyes. John yelled, "My eyes are burning! Oh my God, you're killing me!" The demon drained John's blood out of his body like the rest. The demon gathered up the pieces to the planchette game and returned to the coffin, never to be disturbed. As for John and Karen, they died along with the Talbots' secret. They were never heard from again. Just two missing people lost on an adventure. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this tale, Planchette, which is obviously, let me just say, they're talking about the original game where it was just a piece of wood, and they would have circles in them where there would be 3 pencils or ink, whatever. And the idea was to try and get the spirit to write something with it. Now you see planchettes on Ouija boards, as you know, so that's kind of where it went with that one. It went with the original planchette game, not the Ouija board version. Thanks for listening, guys. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the Dracula Stoller collection. This one's called Spells of Death. Billy Riddle liked to dabble in the occult mainly because he was an outcast with his classmates at school. Billy stood about 4 feet 9 inches tall with jet black hair and a lisp when he would talk. Billy always dreamed about being class president one day, and even his ultimate dream was to be president of the United States of America. But that was stretching it a bit too far. Billy never stood up for himself. He would suppress his feelings, but we all know that's not healthy, to bottle up your anger. As Billy was finishing out his senior year at Ragsdale High School, Billy's classmates invited him to a graduation party at Darren's house as a peace offering for all the evil deeds that had been done to him during his school years. Billy had no idea this wasn't a peace offering. It was just another trick that would cause Billy to want to get even with his classmates. His classmates didn't know they were about to unleash an evil force that would be the last trick that they would ever play on anyone again. Billy was so excited to go to the party and have a good time and put all the pranks behind him. The boy was in for a big surprise. Billy showed up right on time, dressed in his cap and gown and ready to party before graduation that would begin in about 3 hours. As Billy knocked on the door, he could hear the laughter of music that was coming from inside the house. But the laughter was about the prank that the classmates would be playing on him. The door opened. Billy stepped inside, ready to party. Everyone was so nice to Billy, telling him how good he looked and congratulating him on graduating in the top 10 of his class. Darren, the foremost prankster of the whole bunch, took Billy over to get some punch and eat some cake. The blow that Billy was about to drink was laced with enough sleeping pills to knock him out for a solid hour so the classmates could carry out the prank. Billy drank all of his punch and ate the cake and was enjoying the party when he started feeling tired and wanted to lie down on the couch. Darren asked Billy, "Are you okay?" Billy said, "I'm just feeling drained. I'd like to lie down on the couch for a few minutes." Billy lay down. His head hit the cushion on the couch, and he was fast asleep. Darren nudged Billy, but Billy was fast asleep. Okay, everybody, turns the music off. We only have an hour to tar and feather Billy because graduation is an hour and a half away. So let's get started. Darren and some of the classmates took Billy in the backyard, removed his clothing and brushed on the tar all over his entire body, while other classmates tore pillows apart and shook the feathers all over Billy until his whole body was covered. Billy was in a deep sleep and had no idea what was going on. Darren and a couple of classmates threw Billy in the back of Darren's truck and drove Billy's tarred and feathered body to the graduation at Ragsdale High School. As Billy's name was being called to receive his diploma, Billy stood up. As he was approaching the stairs, the students were yelling Billy's name. Billy still had no clue he was being laughed at and just walked up the steps to shake the principal's hand and get his diploma. The principal said, "Billy, what's happened to you? Look at yourself. You're covered in feathers." Billy felt his body and turned to Darren, his classmates, and said, "You'll pay for this." Billy ran off the stage and phoned his mother and father to pick him up at school. Billy's parents were outraged, but Billy assured them it was okay and that he could handle this matter by himself. Even though Billy was angered, he knew his great-aunt was a direct descendant of the Salem witch trials, and she had a spell book. Billy said to himself, "I'm going to have the last laugh after all." Billy got his thoughts together and headed to his great-aunt's farm, where legend has it there is the book of spells hidden deep within the cave. Billy couldn't believe how naive he was to think Darren would have felt guilty about all the pranks that he carried out against him. As Billy was searching through the cave looking feverishly for the book, he remembered that his great-aunt left a sealed note in her dresser drawer with his name on it. Billy decided to stop what he was doing and retrieve the note his great-aunt left for him. Billy ran to the farmhouse and went into his great-aunt's bedroom and opened the unique dresser drawer, and there was a letter, where his aunt said it would be. Billy opened the envelope and started reading it aloud to himself, and it said, "Dear Billy, I only have a couple of great values to leave you, and it is my book of spells. The book is in the cave. To find the book, you have to follow the map which I have included. And maybe this book will help you as it did me. P.S. This is our little secret, and no one is to know about this. When you locate the book, burn the letter and keep the book in the cave in the same place where you found it. Love, your Aunt Grace." Billy couldn't wait to get his hands on the spells. Finally, he will be able to take revenge on his classmates in a deadly way. Billy raced back to the cave to retrieve the book of spells and immediately put the book to use on his backstabbing classmates. Billy threw a pizza in the oven, and as he was waiting for the pizza to cook, he started reading the table of contents for spells that he wanted to use on his classmates. Billy said, "This looks good. Yeah, this is a good spell for Karen. I'll cast a spell on her that'll make her invisible to whomever she comes in contact with, and will surely bring her to breaking point. And by the time spell wears off, she'll be committed to a mental institution for the rest of her life." Billy said the spell aloud and repeated every word, then closed the book and went to bed. There were only 5 more classmates that were responsible for making a mockery all of those years Billy had to endure. When Billy arrived at school, he saw Karen running up to her classmates trying to strike up a conversation with anyone that would listen. No one stopped to talk to her. They just kept walking to their class without gazing upon her. Karen was frustrated, crying aloud and shouting at everyone that walked past her, but no one came to her aid. Karen rushed into the principal's office, screaming at the top of her lungs, but no one said a word. So Karen picked up the phone to call home. Her father answered, and all he heard was a busy signal, so he hung up the phone. Karen picked the phone back up and called her home again. Her father picked up the phone and said, "Who's there? Is this some kind of prank?" Before Karen could say another word, her father slammed the phone down on the receiver. Karen fell to her knees, crying her eyes out, got up off her knees, and ran out of the school screaming into the parking lot and fainted. The next morning the spell wore off, and a student found Karen lying in the middle of the school parking lot. The student tried to get a response from Karen, but there was none. The student called an ambulance, and the school principal called Karen's parents to get to school quickly so they could ride in the ambulance with Karen to the hospital. The paramedics were checking Karen's vital signs as they headed to the hospital. As the ambulance approached the emergency department entrance, Karen's mother asked one of the paramedics her condition. The paramedic just said, "We'll see what the doctor has to say when he checks her over." About an hour later, the doctor came into the waiting area to give Karen's parents the news. The doctor said to Karen's parents, "She's hallucinating and hearing voices, and she should be put into a mental institution just to figure out what's going on. I'm sorry, but I wish I had some better news for you both." The next morning, Billy was in history class and noticed Karen wasn't at her desk. Billy asked one of the classmates, "Where is Karen?" The classmate replied, "You didn't hear. Karen was admitted to a mental institution this morning." Billy said, "Really? That's a shame. She was such a nice girl." Billy said to himself, 1 down, 6 to go. Billy decided to pick out a spell that would top the spell that drove Karen insane. "I believe this one will be good. How about a little game of Russian roulette?" Billy called Sonny, James, and Brenda on the phone to join him this weekend for a bonfire at his aunt's farm. Everyone agreed, only because Billy had put a spell on them. Billy got a revolver out of his aunt's gun cabinet and loaded the gun with live bullets, put a silencer on the barrel so the neighbours wouldn't hear any shots. Billy handed the revolver to Brenda and told her to spin the barrel, put the barrel to a temple, then pull the trigger. Brenda did as Billy asked to do, and Brenda dropped to the ground dead. Billy then asked Sonny to take the gun from Brenda's hand and point the gun at James' head and pull the trigger. Sonny pointed the gun at James' head and pulled the trigger, and James dropped dead to the ground. Billy told Sonny to point the gun at his head and pull the trigger. Sonny pulled the trigger and dropped dead on the ground. Billy said, "That was easy, but I can't leave the dead bodies out in the open. I guess the best thing to do is throw their bodies in the bonfire and then bury their ashes." After Billy was through burying Sonny, James, and Brenda's ashes, he headed back to his aunt's house to pick out another spell for victim number 5, Johnny. Billy skimmed through the spells of death book and found a fitting spell for Johnny called Laughed to Death. Johnny was always a practical joker, but the next joke would put him 6 feet underground. The next evening was Ragdale's high school talent show. Johnny was about to hear the last joke that he wished he ever heard. Billy came to the talent show to watch his spell in action as Johnny laughed himself to death. As the joke was told, Johnny started laughing out of control, even when the jokes stopped. The audience just stared at Johnny, as some of the people next to him tried to calm him down, but that didn't work. Finally, Johnny's heart gave out. Johnny fell out of his chair to the floor. People were trying to revive him, but it was too late. Johnny was dead. Billy quietly got out of his chair and walked out of Ragsdale's high talent show and headed back to his Aunt Sarah's farm to pick out the last spell for the victim number 6, Darren. Billy had such an intense hatred towards Darren that he would make him suffer more than the other 5 classmates. Billy called Darren to invite him over to his aunt's farm. They would have a drink together. Darren agreed to come over, and as night wore on, Billy and Darren had a few drinks. Everything was going fine, until Billy poured a potion in Darren's glass that would make Darren Billy's servant. Billy told Darren to go down into the cellar and stand against the wall, and Darren did as Billy asked. Billy had already had a wheelbarrow full of cement and bricks ready and waiting for his last victim. Billy finished off his drink and headed down to the cellar. Billy placed the bricks in front of Darren one by one until Darren was walled up and there was no way out. After a couple of hours, the spell that Billy put on Darren wore off. The cement had already hardened. All Darren could do is call for help, but no one came. Billy just wiped his hands off and started whistling and walking up the stairs of the cellar and turned to have one last look at the wall, then turned off the light and shut the cellar door behind him. Billy stretched his arms out and yawned. I think this calls for a celebration. Billy got in his car and drove down to Joe's Tavern. Going to Joe's Tavern would be a big mistake for Billy, because anytime Billy had too much to drink, he would like to brag about the things he'd done. The spells that he put on Brenda, James, Johnny, Darren, Sonny and Karen would eventually do him in. As Billy chased down 4 shots of whiskey, his big mouth got the best of him, and the person he was spilling the beans to was an off-duty police officer. The police officer went along with Billy's story and told Billy he'd like to offer him a ride home since he had little too much to drink. As the officer was driving Billy to his aunt's farm, Billy's big mouth started pouring out the details of the spells he placed on his classmates and why he did it. As the officer helped Billy out of the car, Billy was pointing in the direction where Sonny, James and Brenda's lives were taken away from them by a game of Russian roulette that Billy Riddle, Spells of Death, was responsible. The officer asked Billy, "What are you pointing at?" Billy said, "That's where Sonny, James and Brenda were playing Russian roulette, but I couldn't leave their bodies. So I tossed them in fire and I burned their ashes somewhere over there," as he staggered around, barely keeping his footing. The officer luckily taped the whole conversation with a small cassette recorder he always leaves in his shirt pocket, just in case something like this could happen. Billy said, "Why don't you come inside my aunt's house? I'll introduce you to my friend. He's a friend of mine. He's in the cellar." Billy and the officer headed down to the cellar. As Billy was rambling on about his friend Darren, the officer replied, "You have a friend in the cellar named Darren?" "That's right," said the drunken Billy Riddle. As Billy and the officer went down the stairs in the cellar, Billy was calling out Darren's name. Billy staggered to the wall, barely keeping his balance, and started knocking on the wall, telling Darren that a friend was here to see him, and it wasn't polite not to speak. Billy told the officer when he's bored, he comes down to the cellar with a glass of wine and talks to Darren, because it's lonely living in the farm all on his own. Billy then asked the officer his name. The officer said, "David is my name." Billy told the officer he needed to sit down because he had too much to drink. Billy started tapping on the wall and telling Darren to come out and meet his friend David. The officer said, "What is your friend David doing behind the wall?" Billy said, "He's been a naughty boy. So I had to teach him a lesson." "What lesson was that?" said the officer. Billy replied, "He started this whole mess, so I laid one brick at a time until he was no more." After spilling the beans about Darren, Billy passed out on the floor from being drunk. As Billy lay passed out on the cellar floor, the officer went back up the stairs to use Billy's telephone to call. As a crime scene investigator, they need to canvass both crime scene areas where the murders took place. As the crime scene investigators searched the area where the fire was, bone fragments and a piece of jaw was found. The officer, David, went back down to the cellar to try to talk to Billy, but all he did was mumble to himself and pass back out. Officer David told the other officers, just before Billy passed out drunk, he tapped his hand on the wall and said, "Darren's right here, right here." Officer David told the other officers to get a sledgehammer. "Let's see if Darren's really behind the wall." Sure enough, when the wall was broken down, there was Darren's decomposed body. Billy was right. "This must be Darren," the officer said. Officer David said, "I think we have enough evidence to put Billy away for life. Handcuff him. Let's take him down to the station for further questioning." Well, time went on, and after 3 hours of deliberating by the jury, Billy was found guilty of 6 counts of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the deaths of Sonny, James, Cameron, Darren, Brenda and Johnny. As for the Spells of Death book, Billy put it back where his aunt told him to do so no one could ever find it. The end. Well, that's an interesting story because, how it all played out, it wouldn't play out like that in real life. When someone's drunk and mumbling, they're generally not taken seriously anyway, which is a shame because, think about it, probably best to always take someone seriously when they are saying they've committed murder. But anyway, it's an interesting tale that, because it was done by spells, and he still got put away for murder, obviously. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly appreciate it. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many Blessings. Wisteria. Energy. Twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the Drakbon Stoller collection. This story is called The Crematory. Delmer was an only child born into poverty. He grew up on a farm and sheltered from any of the human contacts until the age of 7. His father was an alcoholic. His mother slept with every man in town. Delmer did not know what it was like to have a loving family in a stable home. He believed that every family must be like his until his mother sent him off to school for the first time in his life. At first, everything seemed to be pretty standard for Delmer. He could not understand why his classmates were laughing at him all the time. He wasn't a bully. He didn't have luxuries that other children had at his age, and he had, well, a smell to him. His clothes were slightly ragged, his hair was matted, his teeth were crooked and yellow, he spoke with a lisp, and one of his feet twisted in so he couldn't walk a straight line. Instead of retaliating, Delmer decided to hold all the hurt and anger inside, just like he did with his parents. One day he decided it was time to fire up his father's crematory and see if there was any life in the old furnace. His father's crematory business used to flourish until alcohol started consuming his life. He would beat Delmer and his mother daily. As Delmer lit the furnace, the flames got higher and higher. It was as if the furnace was speaking to him. A sense of calm came over him that he had never felt before in his life. Delmer would sit beside the furnace and talk to it, as if the furnace could actually hear him. One day, his father came down to the crematory, where he hid his booze and stumbled upon Delmer sitting near the furnace. "Boy, what are you doing down here? I thought I told you never to come down here. I guess I'll have to teach you a lesson. Bend over, boy," his father growled as he pulled out his belt. He gulped down the last of his whiskey and started whipping his son uncontrollably. Delmer's cries echoed throughout the crematory and reached the farmhouse. His mother heard his cries and ran to the crematory, where her son lay lifeless. "What happened?" his mother cried. "None of your business, woman. Shut up. This is between father and son. Doesn't concern you," his father replied heartlessly. "Now, get out of here before I beat you too." "You wouldn't," Delmer's mother snapped back. His father opened another bottle of whiskey, turned it up, wiped up his mouth when he'd shut his eyes, and shut the door. "This is for all the men you slept with," he said sternly, as he started beating her with his belt until she fell unconscious. Delmer slowly regained consciousness, glanced up at the furnace. He couldn't believe what he saw in the raging fire. He could hear a voice calling to him. "Get up, Delmer. Your father has passed out from alcohol consumption. He needs to pay for what he has done to you and your mother. I will give you the strength to put him in the fire, and, if you wish it, your mother as well." Delmer accepted the strength, and as promised by the fire, he was able to toss in his mother and father quite easily. He was walking towards the door. The voice called him back. "We're not through here, Delmer. Not by a long shot. As long as you do as I say, you will be rewarded as you've never known," the voice rumbled. "Here is your reward. All you have to do is pull down the handle and pull out the metal drawer." Delmer obeyed and promptly pulled down the handle. He heard something drop into the drawer. As he proceeded to pull it out, there were 2 shiny gold coins worth thousands of dollars. Delmer was ecstatic. "So, all I have to do when I need some money is just come to the crematory, pull the lever. It will drop into the drawer?" Delmer asked. The devil laughed and said, "You silly fool. It's not that easy. If it were, everyone would be doing it. I chose you because of your terrible past and your present forthcoming. The only way to reap the reward is to bring someone alive to me daily. Should you fail to please me, you will die in the furnace just like the others have. Go out. Find me live bodies. Delma had no idea who or what he was dealing with, and he didn't waste any time. He jumped into his dead father's car and set out in search of some live bodies to bring back to the furnace. He started with people that wouldn't be missed. Since Delma only had an elementary education, he didn't understand what he was doing is actually considered as murder. He also had no religious background and knew of no devil nor God. Delma felt it was okay to lure people to the crematory to get a gold coin. Delma thought these were bad people chosen by the voice from the furnace, and he felt like he was doing a good deed for the town where he lived. A year had passed by. Delma had lured hundreds of innocent people to the deaths inside the crematory. Finally, the devil was through using Delma for his dirty deeds, and decided that the next body he brought to the furnace would be his last. After the body was inside the furnace, Delma waited patiently for his reward, but there was none, and he was agitated. "Why?" Delma cried. "I am through here, but there is one thing you can do for me," the devil replied. "What's that?" Delma asked eagerly. "I want your soul. In return, you'll have eternal life." Delma replied without hesitation. "That sounds good. What do you want me to do?" "Just open the door to the furnace and climb in," the devil replied. "I'm not going to climb into the furnace and burn to death," Delma replied, shaking his head. "But you will," the devil roared. Delma ran to the front door and tried to escape, but the door slammed shut in his face. No matter how hard Delma fought to escape, the devil's powers were too strong. The furnace door flung wide open. The devil put Delma into a trance and led him into the blazing furnace. "Step inside. There's a great reward waiting for you," the devil commanded. Delma climbed inside and was never seen or heard from again. All the innocent deaths were never solved, and as for the crematory, the devil burned it to the ground, destroying any and all evidence. The end. And that is the story of the crematory. Wowzers. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I appreciate it. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the Drac von Stoller collection. This story is called The Garden of the Dead. Rachel loved her garden so much. She had her husband Henry put a bench facing her garden, so she could spend hours reading in the sunlight and gazing at the beautiful flowers she planted. Rachel wanted her garden to be the envy of every gardener in the state, but she wasn't sure how she was going to do it. So she read every book about gardening, but was getting frustrated. Then one day, when she was reading one of her books on gardening, she just remembered that her husband Henry had a laboratory in their basement. Rachel decided that one night, when her husband was doing one of his experiments, she would peek her head through the doorway, just to watch what he was up to. Rachel quietly walked down the basement and slowly opened the door just enough to see what her husband was doing. Rachel didn't want him to know that she was watching him because he didn't like to be disturbed when he was working on his experiments. Rachel was getting more frustrated because she didn't see him working on any experiments, not on flowers. Just as Rachel was slowly shutting the door, she noticed he went over to another table and brought a flower that was in a pot and placed it on the table. Rachel was excited. She slowly opened the door just enough not to be noticed. Henry opened a blue bottle and put a few drops of the solution on the flower. Sure enough, the flower got more significant and more beautiful than ever. Rachel shut the door and scurried off to their bedroom, pretending to be asleep. Henry wiped off his forehead with his handkerchief, deciding it was an excellent time to turn in for the night. So, Henry turned the lights out in his laboratory and headed to his bedroom for the night. As Henry climbed into bed, Rachel's heart started beating fast because she wanted to get her hands on the blue bottle. Then, while her husband was asleep, Rachel went to her garden and placed a few drops on each flower, watched them grow taller and more beautiful, so she would be the envy of every gardener in the state. Once Henry's head hit his pillow, he was out like light. Nothing could wake him up. He was in a very deep sleep. As Henry lay there sleeping, Rachel quietly climbed out of bed, grabbed a robe, got Henry's keys to the lavatory out of the nightstand. Rachel clenched the keys in her hand and slowly closed the bedroom door behind her. I headed down stairs to the lavatory to find that blue bottle. Rachel opened the door to the lavatory and closed the door behind her and headed down the steps to find the blue bottle so she could make her garden grow like never before. Rachel searched the cabinets, but no blue bottle. She said to herself, I know the bottle is down here somewhere. She searched and was about to give up. She went over to the plant, and there was the little blue bottle inside the pot. With a sigh of relief, Rachel picked up the blue bottle, headed up the steps, turned the light off in the lavatory, closed the door and locked it. Rachel then grabbed a flashlight out of the kitchen drawer and headed to the garden. She was so excited that her dream was about to come true the next morning. She reached inside her robe pocket, took out the little blue bottle in one hand, turned on her flashlight and placed a few drops from the blue bottle onto each of the petals of the flowers. Some of the drops missed the leaves and seeped into the ground, causing the dead to come alive. Then the magic began. But there was one problem with this whole picture, even though I dream of growing more significant and more beautiful flowers than anyone in the state. There was something evil lurking beneath her garden. Rachel was happy to see her flowers grow. She decided to sit on the bench right in front of her garden, shine the flashlight on her beautiful garden, while her husband was fast asleep. All of a sudden, there was a rumbling beneath the garden. Rich was getting very sleepy and dozed off, and as she was sleeping, dead bodies were coming to life. Rachel's garden was on top of an ancient burial ground. One by one, the dead arose hungry for flesh and blood. Just as Rachel came to from her sleep, the living dead had surrounded her bench, ready for flesh. Rachel jumped off the bench, screaming for her husband Henry, but she knew once he was asleep, nothing could wake him. Rachel tried to run past the dead, but they had her surrounded. The dead grabbed her, knocking her to the ground, tearing her flesh apart as she screamed bloody murder. But no one heard poor Rachel's screams. The next morning when Henry woke up, he noticed Rachel was not lying beside him in their bed. So he got out of bed thinking she was possibly at the garden sitting at the bench reading a book. But that would not be the case because Rachel was no more than bones scattered about the garden she loved. When Henry was right in front of the garden, he noticed the flowers were more prominent, and the ground in the garden was disturbed as though something came out of the earth. Henry was right. Something did come out of the ground, but it wasn't an animal. It was something dead. As Henry was walking around Rachel's garden, he noticed what he thought was white sticks, but they were not white sticks at all. They were Henry's wife's bones. Henry knelt to his knees and picked up what he thought was a stick, but as he got a closer look, he said, "This is no stick. It's a bone." Henry noticed the bone hadn't been there long because there were pieces of flesh still attached and blood on it. Henry dropped the bone to the ground, and as he got up, he noticed a blue bottle on the bench and immediately went over and picked it up off the bench and said, "Oh my, that's my bottle from the laboratory. How did it get here? Oh no, Rachel. She must have been spying on me last night. I knew she loved her garden so much. She would do anything to make it more beautiful." Henry put the blue bottle in his coat pocket, went inside the house to call the police to examine the bones in the garden to see who they belonged to. But he knew. He knew all along they were his wife's bones. After careful examination by the coroner's office, the remains did belong to Henry's wife. When Henry found out the results, he decided he would come back to the garden that night, sit on Rachel's bench and see what took his wife from him. It was a long and sad day for Henry, because his beautiful wife was taken away from him so suddenly while they lay sleeping upstairs in their bedroom. Night finally arrived, so Henry took his revolver and flashlight in case he needed to use it on whatever killed his wife. Henry sat and waited. It felt like an eternity. Henry said, "I must be a fool. There's nothing out here. And besides, my wife was probably shot by a stranger, and while she lay there dying, wild animals attacked her. That's why her bones were found scattered through the garden." Henry teared up and said, "I'll just wait here for about an hour. If nothing happens, sleep." Henry didn't have to wait much longer, as he dozed off just like his wife had, and the ground in the garden started rumbling. The dead began to rise out of the ground, hungry for some more flesh. When Henry woke from his nap, the garden of the dead was pulling Henry off the bench, ready to eat him alive. Henry reached for his gun and started firing shot after shot into the living dead, but it was no good. The dead were already on him, so his bullets were useless. Henry was screaming in agony while the dead were tearing his flesh from his bones. All that Henry could do was watch in pain as the dead ate him alive. Henry's last words were, "Rachel, my darling, I will be with you soon." Word to the wise, if anyone dares enter Rachel's garden after midnight, it will be the last stop. The garden of the dead will eat them alive, just like Rachel and Henry. When the sun rises in the morning, all that will be left on the ground in the garden will be their bones. But the story doesn't end here. The tale of the Garden of the Dead spread throughout the state. People started talking about the cursed garden. Legends and myths were born, and brave adventurers and curious souls from all over the country travelled to witness the garden for themselves. Some believed it was a tale to scare children, while others were drawn by the temptation of witnessing the supernatural. As time went on, the story became more embellished, with people claiming to have seen ghostly apparitions wandering the garden at night. Others swore they heard eerie whispers on the wind. Some even claimed that the dead would rise from their graves and walk among the living in the pale moonlight. As the legend grew, so did the number of visitors to the garden. People came seeking thrill and adventure, hoping to catch a glimpse of the supernatural. Tourist attractions sprung up nearby, offering guided tours, souvenirs. The once peaceful garden turned into a chaotic hub of paranormal enthusiasts and thrill seekers. Rachel's garden became both famous and infamous, drawing people from all walks of life. Some were skeptical, dismissing the stories as mere fantasies, while others were true believers, convinced they had experienced something otherworldly. Amidst the frenzy, a group of paranormal investigators decided to conduct a scientific study of the garden. Armed with various equipment, they spent days and nights observing and recording every detail. The findings were inconclusive, with some data pointing to natural phenomena, while other readings were perplexing and defied explanation. The mystery of the garden persisted, and scholars and scientists delved into the history of the burial ground beneath Rachel's garden. They uncovered old documents and discovered that the site had indeed been a burial ground for a community from ancient times. The legend of the cursed garden seemed to have some historical basis, adding more intrigue to the tale. Despite all the attention and curiosity, the garden remained a place of fear and fascination. Local communities warned their children to stay away from the haunted place, and many refused to even mention its name. The garden became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the unknown forces that lie beyond our understanding. Years passed, and the frenzy eventually died down. The garden reverted to its former peaceful state, Nature began to reclaim the land, obscuring the remnants of the tragic events that unfolded there. And to this day, the Garden of the Dead stands a mysterious, haunting place, shrouded in folklore and urban legends. Some say that Rachel and Henry's spirits still wander the garden, forever bound to the place they love so much. Whether the tales of living dead are true or not, the story of the cursed garden continues to captivate the imaginations of those who hear it, leaving them to ponder the thin veil that separates the living from the dead and the mysteries that lie beyond. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story from Drak von Stoller. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria, energy, twister. Wisteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the Drak von Stoller collection. The next tale is called Death in the Wilderness. As I walked along a lonely path through the forest, the beauty that surrounded me was breathtaking. The trees in the forest overpowered me, and the sunshine that beamed down covered my whole body like a warm blanket. Before I could take it all in, I felt like an evil presence was following me. I knew something was wrong, but I just kept walking faster and faster in an attempt not to lose focus on my destination. Even though I could hear my heart beating out of my chest, I had to keep pressing forward to my cabin just beyond the stream. All of a sudden, an overwhelming feeling of panic took over my whole sense of being. I dared not look back, for if I did, it might have been the end. My cabin was just in sight when rain suddenly came pouring down, drenching my clothes. I feared for my life and did my best to muster up enough energy to reach my cabin, hoping whatever evil lurking behind me wouldn't take me from this world I loved so dearly. I yelled. I just knew someone would hear my cries for help. Unfortunately, no one answered, and I was losing my footing on the muddy ground. I was freezing. I muttered to myself about how such a bright, sunny day turned dark and gloomy. It didn't matter though. The vast world I once knew was about to end. Anything I could say to find comfort in, and warmth was so close, but yet so far away. I took my last breath and fell to my knees. I begged for mercy, but evil doesn't show mercy. My body lay helplessly on the steps of my cabin, my eyes closed for the very last time. Never again would I see the beauty that once surrounded me. As the rain continued to pour, the forest seemed to mourn the loss of the brave soul who had succumbed to the evil lurking in its shadows. Little did anyone know, deep within the woods, a powerful and malevolent force had taken root, feeding off fear and despair of those who dared to venture near. This entity, known as the Shadow Weaver, had been lying dormant for centuries until now awakened by the presence of a vulnerable human soul. Unaware of the darkness that had befallen their beloved forest, the nearby villagers noticed a strange and foreboding change in the atmosphere. The once vibrant and lively was now exuding an aura of fear and apprehension. Whispered tales of disappearances, eerie encounters, spread like wildfire among the villagers, leaving them on edge and fearful of stepping foot near the forest. Within days of the tragedy, a group of brave adventurers and skilled warriors decided to investigate the mysterious occurrences and bring peace back to the forest. Among them was a young and gifted mage named Alara, known for her unparalleled ability to commune with nature and harness its energies. As Alara and her companions ventured deeper into the forest, they could sense the malevolent presence looming over them, growing stronger with each step. The woods themselves seemed to come alive, trees whispering dark secrets, and roots seemingly snaking across the floor with sinister intent. One night, as they set up camp, a haunting melody echoed through the trees. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, yet it sent shivers down their spines. Alara recognized it as an ancient elven song, a plea for help and a warning of imminent danger. The forest was trying to communicate, and Alara knew they needed to listen. She closed her eyes, allowing her senses to merge with the forest's essence. The trees seemed to speak to her, revealing fragments of the Shadow Weaver's history. Ages ago, an evil sorceress had been trapped within the heart of the forest by a powerful spell cast by a coalition of malevolent beings. However, over the centuries, the magic that bound the sorceress weakened, and this allowed the malevolence to seep into the forest and corrupt its core. The Shadow Weaver craved freedom and sought to manipulate and consume the souls of unexpecting victims to regain her power. With newfound determination, Alara vowed to put an end to the Shadow Weaver's reign of terror. She sought guidance from an ancient hermit who lived deep within the forest, a guardian of forgotten knowledge and keeper of powerful artifacts. The hermit revealed a prophecy that foretold of a destined hero who would wield the lost relic known as the Lightbringer to vanquish the darkness. To Alara's astonishment, she was the chosen one mentioned in the prophecy. The Lightbringer, a mystical staff believed to hold the essence of pure light, had been hidden away for centuries, awaiting its true wielder. Their quest to retrieve the Lightbringer was perilous, filled with obstacles. Alara and her companions faced treacherous trials, encountered enchanted creatures, confronted their deepest fears. Along the way, they formed unbreakable bonds and learned the true meaning of courage and sacrifice. As they drew closer to the location of the Lightbringer, the Shadow Weaver grew increasingly desperate. She sent her minions, twisted and corrupted creatures of the forest, to impede their progress. But Alara's determination and her companions' unwavering loyalty proved too formidable adversaries. Finally, after a grueling journey, they reached the sacred chamber where the Lightbringer lay dormant. With a touch of destiny, the staff awakened and resonated with Alara's pure heart. Empowered by the Lightbringer, she could feel an immense surge of energy course through her very veins. Back at the edge of the forest, the villagers gathered to witness the climatic confrontation between Alara and the Shadow Weaver. The once fearsome sorceress, now manifesting as a sinister and imposing entity, taunted Alara with promises of power and dominion if she chose to join forces with her. But Alara stood firm, knowing that the path of darkness only led to destruction. As the final battle ensued, the forest itself seemed to lend its support to Alara. The trees swayed in harmony and the wind carried whispers of hope and courage. With a burst of radiant light, Alara unleashed the power of the Lightbringer, and the forest erupted into a dazzling spectacle of colours and pure energy. The Shadow Weaver shrieked in agony as the light consumed her, returning her to the depths of her eternal prison. Peace was restored to the forest, and the malevolent presence that had plagued it for so long was banished. The villagers rejoiced, their faith in the forest's goodness reaffirmed. Alara, now hailed as a hero, was offered a permanent place among the villagers, but her heart belonged to the woods and its mysteries. With gratitude and sadness in her heart, she bid farewell to her new friends, knowing that their journey was not over. Alara chose to wander the forest once more, continuing her quest to protect the world from darkness and preserve the beauty she held so dear. And so, the legend of Alara, the Lightbringer, spread far and wide, becoming a source of hope and inspiration for generations to come. The forest's beauty remained untouched, thanks to the bravery and selfishness of a young mage who dared to confront the darkness and bring light to the world. And though her story faded into the annals of time, the spirit of Alara lived on, embodied in every ray of sunlight that bathed the woods in its very warm embrace. The end. Thank you for listening to this wonderful tale. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the collection of Drakvon Story Tales. This tale's called Cemetery Gates to Hell. Every night, Kevin would dream the same dream. Each time it seemed to become more and more vivid. It was as though the thought was drawing him closer and closer until he could reach out and touch it. The dream would start with him driving down a road on a stormy night, rain pelting against his windshield like angry tears. As his car approached the destination, he would see a gate at a cemetery, and a devilish-looking man in a cape with blazing red eyes was waving him to come in. But Kevin was just too scared to enter the gates. As Kevin would push on the gas to speed off, his car would stall, and the devilish man in the black cape would approach his vehicle, his sinister laughing echoing through the darkness. Then Kevin would wake up screaming in horror and sweating profusely, his heart pounding like a drum inside his chest. Kevin tried his best before bedtime to read or watch any scary movies on television. He just wanted his mind to be clear of that horrible dream, so anything else in there, he didn't mind. He was just scared of the vision. He was that scared he would leave the light on in the room all night in hopes he could sleep soundly. But that wouldn't be the case. One night, Kevin decided to take a different approach. He told himself that the next time this dream appeared, he would try to remember more details about it and write it down on paper, hoping some clue would suffice to help solve this horrifying puzzle. By doing this, he might even find the location of the cemetery so he could face his tormenting dream head on and get his life back to normal. Before Kevin went to bed, he drank a glass of wine in hopes that would calm his nerves, so when he was dreaming, he wouldn't feel as scared and could focus more on the surroundings. Just before closing his eyes to sleep, Kevin knelt at the side of his bed and said a little prayer, seeking protections and guidance from a force greater than himself. Kevin's preparation before the dream began to pay off for him in a big way. After a night of vivid dreams, he awoke with a clear image of the cemetery gate in his mind. He could read part of the sign now. The name he was able to come up with was Comitorian Gates. But Kevin could not make out the other two words because the rest was blurred out. Still, there was enough clues to pinpoint the location of the cemetery. It was about 50 miles south from where Kevin currently lived. Kevin decided to wait until the next day to search for the cemetery, because the weather forecast showed no clouds in the sky. With a sense of determination, he left the house a little before 3 p.m. after filling up his car's tank with gas. As Kevin was pumping gas, he looked at the sky, closing his eyes to feel the warmth from the sun on his face. Kevin was excited about confronting his fears, and he ran back into the gas station to get his sandwich and drink, tell the cashier to have a wonderful day, and how wonderful was it today. Filled with both fear and hope, Kevin got in his car and he headed for the gates to put an end to this disturbing dream. Little did he know that his dream was about to become a reality and be a last dream that he would ever dream again. Kevin wasn't as perfect as his friend thought he was. He would go to church every Sunday, but when Monday came, his sins would take hold of him. Maybe because he was deep in sin, that's why he was having such a horrible dream. Kevin's car finally pulled up to the gates, and there was no turning back. Just as the car came to a complete stop, the beautiful sky turned grey. Kevin rubbed his eyes and couldn't believe that this beautiful day was becoming so gloomy so fast. Oh, this can't be happening. There wasn't supposed to be a cloud in the sky, Kevin said. Then the storm began, and as Kevin turned his head to the right, there stood the devilish man with blazing red eyes wearing a black cape, waving him, "Come into the cemetery." Kevin closed his eyes and said, "I must be dreaming." As Kevin opened his eyes, nothing changed. The devilish man in the black cape now at the driver's side window. Kevin wet his pants, and his heart was pounding out of his chest. The devilish man was pointing at the sign on the cemetery gate, laughing. Kevin looked at the sign and it read, "Cometarian gates to hell." Kevin was sweating profusely, shaking like a leaf as he tried to start his car and get the hell out of there as fast as he could. But it was no use. His vehicle stalled. The devilish man in the black cape opened Kevin's car door and told him to step out of the car and not to be afraid, because he was expecting him. Kevin got out of his car, and the devilish man in the black cape escorted him into the cemetery gates. Kevin said, Where are you taking me? What is your name, if you must know?" "My name is Lucifer." Kevin's heart was pounding so hard he couldn't stop wetting his pants and shaking. "You belong to me now." That's what the cape man said. Then a door appeared out of nowhere, and the door opened. Kevin stepped inside, and the devil said, "Welcome to hell." The door slammed shut, and Kevin fell into the fiery pit of hell, never to be seen or heard from again. However, Kevin's disappearance didn't go unnoticed. His friends and family were worried sick about him. They searched for him, putting missing posters up, pleading for information for anyone who might have seen him. One person in particular took an interest in Kevin's case. Detective Jessica Hartley, a seasoned investigator with a penchant for solving the most perplexing mysteries, felt an inexplicable connection to Kevin's story. As she delved deeper into the investigation, she discovered that Kevin's experience was not isolated at all. There were other reports of people experiencing similar vivid dreams and subsequently vanishing without a trace. Determined to uncover the truth, Detective Hartley embarked on a journey that would take her into the realms of folklore, mythology, the darkest corners of the human psyche. Through countless interviews, research, late-night sessions, Jessica started to piece together a chilling narrative. Legends spoke of an ancient curse that plagued those who carried deep guilt and sin within them. The curse, known as the Reaper's Embrace, trapped its victims in a perpetual cycle of terrifying dreams until they were consumed by their darkest fears and ultimately led to their doom. As Jessica dug deeper, she encountered others who had experienced the same dream, but somehow managed to break free from its clutches. Each one had faced their demons, repented for their wrongdoings, and found a path to redemption. She learned that Kevin's life had been far from perfect, and his struggle with his inner demons had been more profound than anyone realized. Driven by an unyielding determination to save Kevin, Jessica sought guidance from experts in the occult and spiritual realms. She stumbled upon ancient texts and rituals that could potentially break the curse. Armed with this newfound knowledge, she embarked on a perilous journey to rescue Kevin from the depths of hell. Meanwhile, in the fiery realm of darkness, Kevin found himself surrounded by tormented souls, each one carrying the weight of their sins. The devil taunted Kevin, forcing him to confront the choices he had made in life and the harm he had caused to others. As the days turned into what felt like eternity, Kevin's resolve to break free grew stronger and stronger. He sought solace in the company of others, forming bonds with fellow lost souls who longed for redemption. Back in the mortal world, Jessica assembled a team of individuals that possessed unique abilities. A gifted psychic, knowledgeable historian, a fearless exorcist, and they all came together, united by the shared goal of saving Kevin's soul. They conducted ancient rituals, performed ceremonies, fought against malevolent forces that stood in their way. In the darkness of hell, Kevin and his newfound friends hatched a daring plan. They would challenge the devil himself, demanding their freedom and a chance of redemption. Armed with the strength of their resolve and the support of those who cared about them in the living world, they marched towards the heart of hell, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. The confrontation was epic, with the forces of good clashing against forces of evil. As the battle raged on, Jessica and her team performed their rituals, channeling their energy to weaken the curse that held captive Kevin. They fought alongside Kevin's newfound allies, all of them risking everything for a second chance at life. The devil, threatened by this unified front, unleashed his most sinister powers that he had. Yet, the determination of those who sought redemption proved stronger. They refused to back down, even in the face of unimaginable horrors. With every passing moment, the lines between the living and the dead blurred, the barrier separating hell from the mortal world weakened, the fate of Kevin and countless other souls hung in the balance. In the end, it was an act of self-sacrifice that would break the curse. One of Kevin's newfound friends, burdened by guilt over a past misdeed, chose to take the devil's place and become the guardian of hell. A selfless act disrupted the curse's power, allowing Jessica and her team to pull Kevin back from the fiery abyss. When Kevin opened his eyes, he found himself back in the cemetery where the nightmare had begun. But this time, he was not alone. He was surrounded by faces of family and friends who had never stopped searching for him. Tears flowed freely as they embraced Kevin, overjoyed to have him back. It was a bittersweet victory, for they had lost a dear friend in the battle against darkness. However, they knew that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The experience changed Kevin profoundly. He vowed to live a life free of guilt and to make amends for his past mistakes. With the support of his loved ones and the knowledge that he was not alone in the struggle, he set out on a journey of healing and redemption. Detective Jessica Hartley continued her work, spreading awareness about the curse and helping others confront their own inner demons. The tale of Kevin's harrowing journey became a cautionary legend, a reminder that the darkness within can only be conquered with the light of love, forgiveness, and the strength to confront one's past. In the end, Kevin's journey transcended the boundaries of a nightmare. It became a story of resilience, redemption, and the indomitable human spirit. The kind of tale that would be passed down through generations. A timeless reminder that, even in the face of the most formidable darkness, there's always hope. Hope for salvation. The end. And that's the end of that tale, my dear friends. Thank you so much for listening. If you can hear snoring in the background, it's my Dougal. He's very much in a very deep sleep. And as I'm reading you this, I'm stroking his belly and he's just snoring away like a good little doggy. Little is big, right? But yeah. Thank you so much for listening with me and Dougal, the snorer. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria. Energy. Twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the Tales by Drag von Stoller. This tale is called Flesh on the Grill. Charlie was sick and tired of cooking at his Uncle Sam's diner because all that was on the menu was the same bland stuff that had been on the list for over 20 years at that diner. Charlie knew he could do better than his uncle ever could. Charlie decided he had enough money saved up to open his own little diner in town. The following morning, he was going to tell his Uncle Sam today would be his last day to work at the diner. Charlie broke the news to his Uncle Sam, but Sam was hurt Charlie wanted to leave the family business. Sam said, "Charlie, why do you want to leave? Haven't we paid you well and gave you all the free meals and a nice place to stay?" Charlie answered, "Please don't make this difficult for us both. I'm not happy here anymore. I feel it's time for me to move on. Besides, I'm a man now. I need to take care of myself. Start my diner. I hope you understand, Uncle. Sam replied, Yeah, I do understand. I just wanted to believe you would work at the diner the rest of your life as I have, but sometimes leaving the family business is for the best. When you open your new diner, Charlie, could I please come by and see what wonderful things you've done? Sure, Uncle Sam. You'll be the first person I call. Then Sam comes over, gives him a big hug, and he says, Okay, Charlie, you take good care of yourself. Don't forget to call me when the diner's built. Don't worry, Uncle Sam. You'll love my new diner. Now tell everyone it's been a pleasure working here. Now, I've got to get to the bank and take a small loan to cover some of the construction costs for the new diner, said Charlie. Charlie, why don't you let me give you the money? You need to cover the remaining construction costs, said Uncle Sam. No, I appreciate your kindness, but I need to do this all alone, just like you did when you started your diner, replied Charlie. Well, all right. We'll be talking. Charlie soon, said Uncle Sam. Charlie's diner was up and running, ready to give his Uncle Sam's diner a run for their money. In reality, Charlie's diner was a flop compared to his Uncle Sam's diner, because he didn't know anything about how to bring in customers. Charlie was working long hours to keep the place afloat. Charlie started getting depressed and drinking more than he should. One night, when all his customers were gone, Charlie sat down at one of the tables, eating a ham sandwich because that's all he could afford, since the diner was like losing him so much money. Charlie could barely pay his rent on time. There was no extra money to spend on himself. Charlie went back in the kitchen to make a fresh batch of chili for the next day, since that was one of the best dishes. But that wasn't really saying much. As Charlie was stirring his chili, he paused for a moment, thinking hard. A way of drumming up more business. Bring Uncle Sam's diner customers to his place instead. A man entered the diner then, dressed in black, a trench coat, with a black hat and dark glasses. Charlie said to the stranger, Can't you see we're closed for the night? The stranger responded, That's not why I'm here. I'm here because I want to make a deal with you. Charlie said, Is this some joke or something? This is no joke, said the stranger. Okay, what kind of deal could you possibly want to make with me? Because I'm not selling the diner. I need a way to bring in more customers, that's all, said Charlie. If you're quiet for a moment, I'll tell you what I'm offering, said the stranger. Number one, I don't want to buy you out. What I have to offer will bring in more customers than you could dream about, said the stranger. Okay, I'm listening, said Charlie. The stranger said, Here's the deal. Chili is your speciality, so why not make it irresistible? And what about mouth-watering steaks and chicken to die for? Wait for a second, stranger. How did you know chili is my speciality? Said Charlie to the stranger. I did a little research before I stopped by your diner, said the stranger. The stranger then said, This may sound morbid to you, but I'm telling you, if you do as I say, you'll have more money than you ever dreamed. When you come back in the morning, open the freezer. There will be a note from me telling you how to prepare the meat. Once you have done this, and marinate the meat by the directions, the customers will flood your diner. How's that sound? Charlie said, There has to be a catch, so tell me now, what's the catch? The catch, Charlie, is simple. I want you to sign your soul to me. By signing this contract, if you don't sign this contract, I will burn down your diner along with you in it. You have 5 minutes to think it over, said the stranger. This must be a joke, Charlie responded. Just to prove to you this is no joke, you see that chair over there, said the stranger. The stranger blew fire from his mouth. The chair turned to ash. The stranger put on his glasses and said, I believe your 5 minutes is up. Okay, stranger, you drive a hard bargain. I'll sign my soul over to you, laughed Charlie. As Charlie was signing his name on the dotted line, the stranger touched Charlie's hand. When the stranger raised his hand off Charlie's hand, the number 666 appeared on his hand. When Charlie looked up, the stranger vanished into thin air. Then the stranger's voice echoed throughout the diner, saying, "Remember our deal. You break it, you die." The next morning, Charlie did as the stranger told him. Opened the freezer, and there was a note and meat on the hook. Charlie took the note and everything and read it, and the stranger said, "Look behind you on the meat hook. There's a rack of meat and a meat tenderizer in the refrigerator behind the counter. Once you use all of this meat, you'll have to replenish the stock in the freezer. Charlie, cut off enough meat to make some chili and steaks for tonight's menu." Charlie said to himself, "I hope this does the trick and brings in customers by the truckload." Charlie had no idea what he was cutting up, but it was human, not animal, and the meat tenderizer was a mixture of human blood, special herbs, and, well, strange in a black sort of concocted way. Charlie fired up the grill in the kitchen. They let the meat set in the tenderizer for about an hour according to directions. Charlie placed the meat on the grill, and the aroma poured through the exhaust pipe to the outside air. Cars were pulling into Charlie's diner like it was the only restaurant in town. Charlie couldn't believe what he was seeing and said to himself, "The stranger was right. Cars will be pouring into my diner by the truckload," said Charlie. Charlie was becoming overwhelmed by the customers and needed more help, so he called some of his friends to see if they could come out and, help him out with jam. Before he knew it, Charlie's diner was fully staffed and money was coming in at such a fast pace he could barely fit it in the cash register. And Charlie was smiling ear to ear, and one of the customers asked Charlie, "Where did you get this meat? It's so tender, and what do you use for marinating? I want your recipe. Do you think about bottling the tenderizer and selling it in stores? I believe you've got the best meat tenderizer in the state, maybe in the whole United States. I know a friend. Might be able to market your meat tenderizer." Charlie was so excited that he could go to the bank and pay off the loan, quit eating ham sandwiches. Everything at Charlie's diner was going well until he opened the freezer and noticed he used up all the meat and tenderizer. The stranger in black left in the refrigerator. It was all empty. What am I going to do now if I don't get some fresh meat and tenderizer? A few hours later, a lot of pacing back and forth at the diner, the stranger in black appeared at one of Charlie's tables. Charlie came over to the stranger in black and said, "How did you get in here? I didn't see you enter through the door of my diner." "Charlie, that's not important right now." "How are things going?" asked the stranger. "Are all the customers pouring into your diner like I said they would?" asked the stranger. "Well, yes, and I can't thank you enough, kind sir, but I have a major problem on my hands. I've run out of meat and tenderizer you brought me to get my business off the ground," said Charlie. "Could you please help me out, and I won't bother you anymore, that's a promise." "Charlie, why don't you take a seat, and I will tell you a little secret. When I tell you this secret, you can't back out, because you signed over your soul, and I own you," said the stranger in a more angry tone. Charlie nervously sat down. "Okay, tell me a secret," asked Charlie nervously. "Now that I've got your attention, the meat in the freezer you were cutting was not wild meat. It was human. The meat tenderizer was human blood mixed with special herbs I concocted. Before you get up and try to run out of the store to call the police, I'll have you thrown on your grill and watch you cook alive. When your body is done cooking, I'll cut pieces of flesh from your body, dip it in my special steak sauce that is irresistible, and eat it," said the stranger in black. Charlie responded to the stranger in black, "Are you some kind of sick pervert? Because I never killed anyone in my entire life. You expect me to believe this is all right? Well, you might as well throw me on the grill and cook me, because I think you're bluffing." Charlie jumped out of his seat and made a beeline towards the door. Then he climbed in his car while the stranger in black was laughing. Charlie was shaking like a leaf because he thought the stranger was a psychopath and may cause him harm. Charlie was right. The stranger in black was none other than the devil. Charlie frantically turned the key in the ignition, but no response. The stranger in black approached Charlie's car, busted out the driver's side window and grabbed Charlie by the throat, yanked him out of his vehicle, throwing him to the ground, saying, "If you're not convinced about how serious I am, maybe this will convince you," the stranger said. "I think the grill is on, but there's one thing missing, and I believe that is meat. I wonder where I can find some fresh meat." "Oh, I know where, Charlie." "Not me," cried Charlie. Then, before Charlie could say another word, his body was lying on the grill burning. The stranger in black said, "Well, do you believe me now?" "Yes, please give me one more chance. I'll do anything you ask," cried Charlie. "One more thing before you go. I'm the devil." "Ha-ha!" The devil raised Charlie off the grill and told Charlie, "If you want to keep your diner and your life, you better get to work. The next time you see me, I won't be so forgiving. And when I put you on the grill, you won't be coming off. And I will be dipping your flesh in my steak sauce, enjoying every bite, while you are screaming for me to stop and give you another chance." The next morning, Charlie started placing ads in the local newspapers to hire more cooks and waitresses. Charlie had no problem finding help, because his diner was a talk of the town. But for anyone that answered Charlie's ads, well, it would be their last. Charlie would give his applicants a tour of the diner. Then, as they were filling out application after application forms, Charlie would come up behind them, knock them unconscious, and give them a lethal injection of poison. After Charlie's first kill, he said, "This isn't as hard as I thought it would be. But after a while, just like all killers, you're bound to slip up." As the body count was getting a bit too high, the police were starting to pay Charlie frequent visits to his diner. But it wasn't for food. It was about his applicants coming up missing without a trace. Charlie was also running out of excuses for the police to where his missing employees were. Customers started complaining about their food tasting funny because Charlie was giving lethal doses of poison to his victims. There were traces of poison on their flesh, which caused the flesh that was cooked to taste funny. The truckload of customers that used to fill up Charlie's parking lot was starting to diminish day by day. It wasn't long until Charlie was back where he began, broke and desperate. As Charlie was getting ready to lock up for the day, the devil decided to visit Charlie. "Charlie, it looks like things are going south for you, but if you need my help, I'm here to help you out for one last time," said the devil. "Really?" Charlie said nervously. "Yes, Charlie. I think I've seen enough of what you can do, so I've decided to live up to my end of the bargain," said the devil. "What are you talking about, devil?" asked Charlie. "How quickly do we forget? Let's see. I do believe you signed your soul over to me, and I'm ready to collect. And by the way, Charlie, did you forget to turn the grill off?" said the devil. "No, it's not on. I turned it off myself just a few minutes ago," said Charlie. "It kind of smells like you left some fresh flesh on the grill, Charlie." "No, you must be mistaken," said Charlie nervously. "Well, I think we should both go over to the grill and see if I'm telling the truth," said the devil. "Why don't you check it out for yourself? I think I left something in my car. I'll just go get it and I won't be long," said Charlie as he was shaking nervously. As Charlie raced towards the door to make a run for the door that was locked, he shouted, "Please let me out. I've done nothing wrong. Please let me out," as Charlie was shaking like a leaf. "I don't think you're going anywhere. The only place you're going is on the grill. You know something, Charlie? I don't think I've tried your great cooking, and I think now is a good time." The devil picked Charlie's skinny body up, threw him back on the grill for the last time. As Charlie lay there on the flaming grill, screaming and bleeding for his life, slipping in and out of consciousness, the devil was pouring meat tenderizer on Charlie's body, preparing his body for a tasty meal. The devil started hacking pieces of Charlie's body off, cutting his flesh into smaller pieces, dipping it in the devil's steak sauce while laughing and calling Charlie a stupid fool. Charlie, did you think I wouldn't come back to get your soul and destroy you? I'm the devil. The next morning, Charlie's diner was on fire. The devil turned the grill on the highest setting and blew fire from his mouth, causing the diner to explode and leave charred remains of wood and Charlie's body on the ground. After careful investigation by the police and fire department, they discovered skeletal remains on Charlie's grill. The skeletal remains were taken for analysis. The results came back stating the remains belonged to Charlie, but they weren't sure why his body wound up on the grill. The police report stated that the grill must have had a gas leak and Charlie's lungs were filled up with carbon monoxide, which resulted in Charlie's death, and his body just fell onto the grill. The coroner's report stated that Charlie's death was an accident. There would be no further investigation into the matter of Charlie's death. All the missing applicants that went missing without a trace just went up in flames, with Charlie on the grill. The end. Well, that's wow. I like that. That's a macabre tale, if I ever heard one. And it's comical in a way. It's quite funny in a way, but it's definitely macabre too. Thank you if you stuck in and listened to this one. A bit gruesome, but yeah. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria. Energy. Twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the next story by Drak von Stoller. Once Upon a Nightmare. Why am I dreaming this dream over and over again? Haven't I always been a good boy? Said Johnny Wellington. Johnny didn't like living in his father's castle because of the horrid past of the torture chambers that claimed so many of the townspeople's lives. The Wellingtons, who lived for hundreds of years in the castle before Johnny, were a greedy royal family who liked to throw big ballroom parties, especially masquerade parties. Sir Jonathan Wellington, the owner of the castle, would make sure everyone at the party had plenty to drink and a good time dancing, loud music, to cover the screams down in his chambers of horrors. He didn't want anyone at the party to suspect a thing. Sir Jonathan Wellington was very proud of his torture chamber and liked to brag about it to his party guests sometimes. Sir Jonathan would carefully pick out who he wanted to show his torture chamber to. Usually, loners that were not much fun to be around. Sir Jonathan would put a mild sedative in their drink just before he would lead them down to the Chamber of Horrors. Sir Jonathan's Chamber of Horrors went on for many years until he got a little sloppy with his choices of victims. When the two victims that were led down to the Chamber of Horrors pretended to drink their drinks, well, they overpowered Sir Jonathan and put him on one of his own torture devices, the rack, then stretched him until his body was completely ripped apart. No one knows how many victims there were, but there were enough to make Sir Jonathan a serial killer in those days, even though it wasn't really a term back then. Sir Jonathan's Chamber of Horrors could be the reason for all of the hauntings surrounding the Castle Wellington. Johnny's father would tell him bedtime stories about the castle, which would cause him to have nightmares. But for some reason, Johnny would only have one dream, and that would be being buried alive in the garden. When Johnny would dream this dream, he would go to the window and look down at the garden and see a man digging with his shovel a shallow grave. The man would turn and look at Johnny and point at the ground. While the man was looking at Johnny, Johnny had a strong feeling the shallow grave he was digging was for him. Johnny could not make out the man's face, but he did notice one thing, that the man's clothing was of a different era. Johnny would tell his father about the horrid dream, but his father would say to him, "It's just a dream, that's all." But Johnny knew this was no dream to him at all. It was a nightmare. The stories that his father would tell him before he went to sleep had been called Once Upon a Nightmare. The more Johnny dreamt the same dream, the more scared he got. After Johnny got up the next morning, he opened his bedroom door and actually noticed muddy footprints at the foot of the door. Johnny took off like a rocket downstairs to the kitchen, where his father was preparing breakfast for them both. Father, there's muddy footprints at my door. You need to come see. Johnny was shaking like a leaf, so his father said, "Okay, let's go see the footprints at your bedroom door." Johnny and his father went upstairs to check these footprints out, but when Johnny pointed out where the prints were, they were gone. Johnny said, Father, you've got to believe me. There were footprints right here." Johnny got on his hands and knees to feel any presence of mud, but there was none. Johnny's father told him he was taking those bedtime stories a little too far, and that he wasn't going to say to him any more bedtime stories at all until the nightmare stopped. Things seemed to be going fine for Johnny for about a month or so. Just as Johnny was about to forget about these terrible nightmares, the man in the garden was back. But this time, Johnny's dream was going to be real. As Johnny was fast asleep, the muddy footprints appeared at Johnny's bedroom door. Then his bedroom door slowly opened. The man in his nightmares entered Johnny's bedroom, slowly walking towards Johnny's bed, carefully and quietly, picking Johnny up out of bed. The man carried Johnny to the garden where a shallow grave was already dug. The man placed Johnny's body in the ground and started piling dirt on Johnny's body. But Johnny all of a sudden woke from his deep sleep and started yelling for his father for help. But the walls of the castle were too thick for anyone to hear any loud noises outside. The man told Johnny, "No one can hear you." Johnny screamed and screamed. Then the man raised his shovel and hit poor Johnny on the head. Johnny was dead. The man finished burying Johnny's body, then vanished into thin air, leaving a note on Johnny's grave for Johnny's father to read. Morning came, and just like any other day, Johnny's father would be in the kitchen making breakfast, and Johnny would be right down shortly because Johnny liked the smell of the bacon cooking on the stove. Johnny's father kept looking at his watch and noticed something was wrong, because Johnny was always on time for breakfast. He wouldn't miss out on such an essential meal of the day. Johnny's father took off his apron and headed up the stairs to Johnny's room to see what was taking him so long. But just as Johnny's father was about to reach Johnny's room, he saw muddy footprints leading to Johnny's room, and the bedroom door was wide open. Johnny's father called out to his son, but there was no answer. Then he searched his son's room and ran out of the room and decided to follow the muddy footprints down the stairs and out of the castle to the garden. As he approached the garden, he saw a shovel in a shallow grave, just as Johnny described in his dreams. Johnny's father cautiously approached the shallow grave and feared the worst. He knew Johnny's nightmare was a reality. Johnny's father dropped to his knees, sobbing, and said, "Why, Lord, I should have listened to Johnny and taken his dreams seriously." As he was wiping his tears from his eyes, he noticed a piece of paper next to the shovel. He thought it was a note from his son, but it wasn't. It was the man who killed Johnny, who buried his son in the shallow grave in the garden. Johnny's father slowly opened the piece of paper and read it aloud. The note said, "Why didn't you listen to Johnny? Nightmares do come true. Signed, Sir Jonathan Wellington." Okay, maybe he wasn't dead after all then. I don't know, what do you think, guys? Think it was a ghost, a phantom, or was he still actually alive? And it wasn't that long ago that the stories happened, but his dad would tell them to him like it was long ago. And it's a possibility, I suppose. Thank you for listening to this tale. Please hit the like, share if you can, and if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Many blessings. Wisteria. Energy. Twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Happy October. So, we're going to go into the Drac von Stoller stories. Drac von Stoller has a wide selection available to read on the Google Play app. They are short, but all are very interesting. And when I say a wide selection, I mean a really wide selection. This is called Killer Bedtime Stories. Billy and Susan loved to hear their father read stories to them every night at bedtime, but felt the stories were for little kids, and wished their father would read scary stories to them instead of the Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. They were okay when we were younger, but we're much older now, said Susan. I feel the same way. I like it when Mother and Father go out to dinner at night, so that we can watch scary movies together, replied Billy. Next time we spend the night at Grandma's, maybe we can sneak out of bed and see if she has any old creepy books in her attic. If she does, we can give them to our father to read to us instead of those boring stories he's been reading to us for the past several years, exclaimed Susan. Tonight. We'll ask him if he'll let us spend the night at Grandma's house this weekend. I'm sure he'll say yes, said Billy. Night finally arrived. Billy and Susan asked their father if they could spend the night with their grandma tomorrow. Their father said, I don't see why that would be a problem because your mother and I are planning a weekend trip. Billy and Susan were happy that their father was going to let them spend the night with their grandma. Billy said, I hope Grandma has a spooky book in her attic. I hope so too, replied Susan. Let's get some sleep, said Billy. Morning came, their father told Billy and Susan it would drive them to their grandma's house after they ate lunch. Billy and Susan finally arrived at their grandmother's house, ready to explore her attic that night for the spooky book. That night, Billy said, let's sneak out at midnight. I hope we find a spooky book in the attic. Midnight came, and Billy and Susan climbed out of their beds and tiptoed out of their bedroom with great anticipation of finding the spooky book. They slowly walked up to the stairs that led to the attic. The attic door creaked open. As it opened, Susan pointed at a trunk. Look, Billy, there must be a book in that trunk. Billy replied, Be quiet or you'll wake up Grandma and everything will be spoiled. Sorry, I'm just excited about what lies inside the trunk, exclaimed Susan. Billy and Susan went over to the trunk to see what was inside. They noticed the lock was rusty and were determined to see what was inside the mysterious chest. Billy said, I think I see a metal pipe in the corner, and that should do the trick. Billy got the pipe and was able to break the lock. He opened the trunk and Susan started rummaging through the old trunk and said, All I see is an old doll and a photo album. Wait, look, Billy. A book. It looks ancient. Susan blew off the dust and read the word on the cover of the book aloud to Billy. It says, Bedtime Stories to Die For. All of a sudden, the attic door opened and Susan said, Quick, shut the trunk. I'll hide the book under my robe. There at the doorway was their grandmother with hands on hips. She said, What are you children doing in the attic at this time of night? We're just looking around. We couldn't sleep. We didn't mean any harm, replied Susan and Billy. Well, you children try to get some sleep, explained Grandma. Yes, Grandma. We'll go right to bed now, said Billy. Billy and Susan went back to their bedroom and waited until they heard their grandmother return to her bedroom. Susan lied down next to her brother Billy and read the first story entitled The Killer in the Closet. As Susan was reading the story, the closet door slowly opened. But Billy and Susan, they were too engulfed in the story to even notice. The story Susan was reading was from a witch's spellbook. The more Susan read the story, the more the killer in the closet was coming to life. Susan said, Billy, do you hear something? No, keep reading, replied Billy. When Susan turned the page in the book, the killer in the closet was standing right beside them, axe in hand. Susan screamed, and they both froze in fear, but it was too late for the grandma to stop the terror that was about to take place. Their grandmother burst through the bedroom door and screamed in agony. She watched in horror as her grandchildren's heads rolled off the bed and onto the floor. She took off down the hall to escape the killer in the closet, but Grandma didn't have a chance. The killer in the closet gave Grandma the axe. Then the killer in the closet vanished without a trace, except for 3 headless bodies that would leave the police scratching their heads with no clue as to who the killer was. All that was left behind at the scene of the crime was the book lying on the bed, covered in Billy and Susan's blood, waiting for the next curious poor soul to pick it up and read a bedtime story from it. The end. And that is our first story for October. Killer Bedtime Stories by Drac von Stoller. Many blessings. Hello everyone, happy October. Welcome back to my channel. The Legend of the Headless Woman by Drac von Stoller. It was Halloween. Jan and her friends, Misty and Michelle, decided to dig up a legend that should have been just that. But we all know teenagers feel that they are invincible. Nothing terrible will happen to them. Bad things only happen to other people. Or do they? Legend says an old woman in a cabin in the woods was a witch. The townspeople never proved it over 100 years ago. One of the daughters of the townspeople went missing in the woods, was found dead on the steps of the old lady's cabin. When the old lady arrived back to her cabin after gathering berries, she was startled by an angry mob of people with torches, blazing and shouting, "You murderer! You killed her!" Immediately, the old woman was grabbed by the angry mob and held down next to the dead girl's body. And one of the people from the mob said, "For what you have done, we sentence you to death by decapitation." The old lady screamed out like a river of fears and tears, many tears that flowed down her cheeks. But the angry mob was in no mood to hear what the old lady had to say. All they wanted was swift justice. Then one of the men carrying an axe in his hand said, "I hope you rot in hell, witch." Then the axe came down. The old woman's head rolled off the cabin steps. The old lady's decapitated body was buried behind her cabin along with her head. The angry mob picked up the dead girl's body and took her back to town for a proper burial. Legend also says, if you dance on the old lady's grave after midnight and say these words, "Can you hear me, witch? Oops, I forgot you lost your head." A spell will be cast upon you from beyond the grave, and you will be cursed for life. But it is only a legend, and no truth to it. But one of these lucky girls will find out dancing on a grave and making fun of the dead might prove fatal to whosoever disrespects the dead. Jan, Misty, and Michelle arrived at the woods 1 minute before midnight as the thunder was crackling off in the distance. The mood was set. They were ready to find out if the legend about the old woman was correct. The girls pressed forward as the wind was picking up, and the lightning lit up the sky. Misty said, "Look, is that the cabin over there?" Michelle chimed in and said, "I believe you're right." As the girls got closer to the cabin, ghostly voices were echoing through the woods. Finally, the girls reached their destination, and just as Misty stepped on the first steps of the cabin, the lightning illuminated the steps, and she glanced down and said, "Is that bloodstains?" Jan and Michelle replied at the same time as they glanced down at the stains on the step and said, "Yes." That was good enough proof for the girls to know that they were in the right place. Jan took off around the back of the cabin to reassure herself that the grave of the old woman was there, and she could put this legend to the test once and for all. Misty and Michelle followed Jan to the back of the cabin, and there she was grinning from ear to ear. as she was dancing on the old lady's grave. Misty said, Jan, you sure are taking this legend about this old lady serious? You betcha. But I don't think that dancing on a grave is going to do anything, so I've got this idea. Why don't we dig up the old lady and see if she's headless? That way, I'll have 100% proof, along with the bloodstains on the steps of the cabin, that the legend is true, said Jan, with a big smile on her face. Mr. Michelle said, we ain't digging up any dead body. We're going to check out the inside of the cabin. You're on your own on this one, said Misty. Jan replied, okay, scaredy cats, I'll do it myself. But neither one of you will get credit if this legend is true. Mr. Michelle said, we don't care. As Mr. Michelle were entering the cabin, the wind was picking up, and so was the thunder and lightning. Jan was dancing on the old woman's grave. An eerie voice said, go to the barn. Jan asked, why? The eerie voice said, there is a shovel, so you can dig me up. Jan yelled out and said, okay, girls, your prank isn't hilarious. Jan ran to the front of the cabin, but there was no sign of Misty and Michelle. The voice got louder and said, go to the barn and get the shovel, so you can put my head back on my shoulders, so that I will be at rest once and for all. Jan ran and got the shovel and returned to the old lady's grave. As Jan was digging up the grave, the voice had Jan in some sort of hypnotic state, so she wouldn't back out. Jan finally reached the old woman's body. Then, the headless body rose from the grave and placed her cold hands on Jan's head. Misty and Michelle went back to the back of the cabin to check on Jan and got the shock of their lives. Jan's head was being severed off her shoulders by the old lady. Misty and Michelle started screaming and crying as they watched in horror as the old lady's decapitated body was decapitating their friend's head. The girls took off, running in fear. The headless body of the old lady chased the terrified teens through the woods. The thunder and lightning just added to their scary situation. Michelle tripped over a log and screamed out for Misty to help her. But Misty was so close in making her way out of the woods to get the help. She wasn't turning back. The headless old woman picked up Michelle as she was begging the headless woman not to hurt her. But the hell had already been unleashed, and hell shows no mercy. The headless woman tore Michelle's head off her shoulders as her blood-curdling screams echoed throughout the woods. Misty's heart was pounding out of her chest, and she could barely see where she was going because of the river of tears flowing from her eyes. The headless woman dropped Michelle's decapitated body to the ground and threw her severed head at Misty just as she was about to be free from the hell in the woods. Michelle's severed head hit Misty in the back of her head, causing her to lose her footing and fall to the ground. The headless woman grabbed Misty by the back of her head and put her foot on her back and pulled Misty's body backward, causing her spine to snap into pieces. The pain was so great that the neighbors that were close by in their houses could hear Misty's blood-curdling screams echoing through the woods. Then the headless woman tore Misty's head off her shoulders and tossed the severed head out of the woods to show the legend of the headless woman is not a laughing matter. So if you find yourself near these woods and think this legend is just a joke, I dare you to dig up the old lady's grave and see if you make it out of these woods with your head still attached to your shoulders. If I were a betting man, I would put my money on the headless woman. The end. And that is the legend of the headless woman, the headless witch of the woods, by Drac von Stoller. Thank you for listening, guys, and many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is called Let's Scare Sarah to Death by Drac von Stoller. Sarah Jackson was about 5 feet, 4 inches tall with dark brown hair and freckles. She was getting picked on because she had a hard time speaking clearly and loud enough for anyone to hear her. Anytime she tried out for the school team, she always finished last and was laughed at by her teammates. Sarah wanted to be popular, but some of her classmates at school didn't want to hang out with her. They also didn't care if anything wrong happened to her. As Halloween was just a few weeks away, Dan, Karen, and Susan, who were the most popular in school, had a plan to see how far they could take scaring Sarah without bringing any harm to her. But as always, things can get out of hand and cause injury. Karen called Sarah on the phone and invited Sarah to join her, Dan and Susan, to a haunted attraction. Sarah didn't want to go because she was afraid of all things scary, but her will to be popular and accepted by these classmates was more important than anything at this moment. Sarah met up with them at the Haunted Woods attraction, and Karen, Susan and Dan were ready to see how Sarah would react at this haunted attraction, to give them some idea how easily Sarah could be scared. Sarah tried her best to keep her fright inside, but she weakened just minutes into the attraction and asked Karen and her friends to go through the rest of the haunted woods without her. They just laughed and called a chicken. Karen looked at Sarah and said, "If you want to hang up with us anymore, you better just suck it up and get through it, or we'll tell the whole school how chicken you are." Sarah swallowed the massive lump in her throat and held back the fright and said, "Please don't. I won't leave. I'll get through it. You'll see." Karen said, "You better, or you won't see us again." It took all of Sarah's energy, but she managed to make it through the haunted attraction without backing down. The next day at school, Dan told a few of his classmate buddies that Sarah was a scaredy cat, and it spread like wildfire through the school. Sarah confronted Karen about being laughed at, and she was the laughingstock of the school. "I didn't say a word. It must have been Susan or Dan," Karen insisted. Sarah asked Susan, and Susan said, "I didn't say a word." When Sarah approached Dan, he burst out laughing and said, "Well, it's true. You were a scaredy cat." Sarah was pissed and stormed out of the classroom, running down the hallway and dodging everyone in her path as they called her names. That night, Karen called Sarah and was able to calm her down. "We'll give you one more time, and I will promise you'll have Dan's and Susan's word this time," explained Karen. "Okay," replied Sarah. "What I want you to do is spend the night in the old Delaney mansion. If you make it out alive by morning, you'll be one of us." "How's that sound?" explained Karen. "Okay, I'll do it," exclaimed Sarah, "but only if Dan apologizes." "Deal," said Karen. Karen called Dan and had him call Sarah back and pretend he was sorry for making fun of her. Dan called Karen again and said it worked. She believed my apology. "Great. Tomorrow night is Halloween, and just after midnight a storm is on the way. We'll be ready to scare Sarah to death." Just kidding about the death part. Karen, Dan and Susan put cobwebs throughout the mansion and put together some spooky recordings to scare Sarah throughout the night and put on some scary costumes. Karen drove to Sarah's house that night to pick her up and take her to the mansion and see that she was locked inside for the night, and then drove away into the stormy night. Sarah watched Karen's car disappear after a few flashes of lightning, but Karen wasn't driving away. Instead, she parked her car a block away from the mansion and headed back to where Susan and Dan were patiently waiting so they could all start scaring Sarah. As Sarah was lying on the couch reading a book, the thunder and lightning was becoming more intense, and that's when Karen, Dan and Susan started the spooky recordings to increase the scare factor for Sarah. Sarah gazed at her watch, and as the second hand struck midnight, so did the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Doors started opening and closing. Sarah closed her book and laid it on the dusty nightstand and raced over to the front door, trying to escape, but it was no use. Sarah ran to each window in hopes she could raise one and get to safety, but they were all nailed shut, thanks to Karen, Dan, and Susan. Sarah was shaking and ran back to the couch and put the blankets over her head. She closed her eyes tight, but the scare level was at an all-time high. Dan went to the fuse box and cut the power off. At this point, Sarah was praying the night would end soon. Karen, Dan, and Susan, dressed in their spooky costumes, each carrying a candle. They entered the room when Sarah was shaken under the covers. Dan jerked the covers off Sarah and they all said, "You will be dead by sundown." Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream that ultimately stopped her heart. Susan told Dan to go to the fuse box and turn on the lights. When he did, Karen and Susan said, "Dan, she's dead." Dan ran back into the room and said, "You're kidding." "No, we're not," Karen replied. Dan checked for a pulse, and there was none. "We've got to get rid of her body," Karen said. Dan rolled Sarah's body up in the sheets and took her down to the basement and buried her there. "No one is to say a word about this, because if someone does, we'll all be locked up for the rest of our lives, and we won't want that to happen, do we?" Karen said in a panicky voice. Dan and Susan agree, and they all went home to put this tragic incident behind them, but it was far from over. The next night, something buried in the Delaney mansion was going to pay Dan, Susan, and Karen a visit while they lay fast asleep in their warm beds. They didn't have to worry about spending the rest of their lives in prison. Instead, they would be spending the rest of their lives at the local cemetery, 6 feet in the cold ground. It looks like Karen, Dan, and Susan did scare Sarah to death as they wanted, but in the end, justice was served. Beyond the grave by Sarah's ghost. The end. And that is the tale of Let's Scare Sarah to Death by Drac von Stoller. Many blessings. Hello everyone, happy October. Welcome back to my channel and Drac von Stoller collection. The Bell Hollow Road Axe Murders. This story goes back to the early 19th century in a small town called Willow Oaks. Abraham and his family owned the majority of Willow Oaks farmland until a shrewd businessman by the name of Jasper bought a small patch of land near Abraham's farm. It wasn't long before jealousy set in, and being that Jasper was a smart man and Abraham wasn't, he used it to his advantage to swindle Abraham out of the majority of his land. But when Abraham didn't receive the money promised to him by Jasper, he threatened to kill him. Instead of Jasper making good on his promise and pay Abraham, he decided to shut him up for good. The following morning, Jasper went to the hardware store to purchase an axe, thinking that would solve everything. And being that it was a small town, nobody would ever find out. He did the dirty deed. Around mid-afternoon, Jasper saddled his horse up and rode to Abraham's farmhouse to tell him he would have his money by morning. But he knew very well he didn't have the money to pay him for his land. Being that Abraham trusted everyone and believed the lies that Jasper fed him and imagined the funds would be in his hands by morning, the only reason Jasper rode out to his farm wasn't about reassuring Abraham he would get his money, but to case out his house and property. So when nightfall came, he would come back with the axe and finish off his family. Night finally set in and Jasper got his axe and saddled up his horse and rode into the night to Abraham's farm. As Jasper arrived at Abraham's farm, he said to himself, "I will be glad when this is over so I can buy his farm and be the wealthiest man in town." Jasper got off his horse and put the axe in his right hand and quietly walked up the grassy hill to Abraham's porch, checked to see if the front door was locked, and was relieved it wasn't. He crept, not to awaken anyone, As he approached the stairs, he took a deep breath and said to himself, "There's no turning back now." Jasper made his way down the hallway with the axe tightly gripped in his right hand to Abraham's bedroom door and entered the room. Abraham and his wife fast asleep. Jasper slowly approached their bed and raised the axe above his head with both hands. And with one hard whack, the axe came down with great force, that Abraham's head split into two pieces. Abraham's wife woke up in fright and screamed. Then Jasper swung the axe and cut her head clean off her shoulders, sending her head flying out the bedroom window. It bounced off the porch onto the ground. Jasper took his blood-soaked axe and exited the bedroom and ran down the stairs out the front door and got his horse, riding as fast as he could, back to his home to open a bottle of whiskey and celebrate. As Jasper sat in his chair next to the warm fireplace, he said, "Finally, I got this little problem taken care of." Little did Jasper know, his little celebration would be short-lived, because his small problem was about to visit him, and it wouldn't be a warm welcome. As the last drop of whiskey dropped on his tongue, the front door of the house flung wide open, and Jasper shouted, "Who's there?" Abraham and his wife entered and said, "Jasper, you didn't think you were going to get away with murder." Jasper's eyes flung wide open, and he looked at the bottle of whiskey and said, I am drunk." Then he closed his eyes, and when he opened them back up, thinking it was just an hallucination, Abraham and his wife were standing right in front of him. Jasper by now knew this wasn't any dream and started pleading for his life. But Abraham and his wife just laughed, picked up the axe, and gave Jasper the axe. The next morning, Abraham and his wife's chopped-up bodies were discovered by a friend of the family. Jasper's body wasn't found until about 2 days later. The sheriff was baffled by the murders of Abraham and his wife because they were the kindest people you would ever meet and would do anything for anyone, even if it meant them going without. They just loved the peacefulness and their farm brought to them and how kind all the townspeople were to them. They always left their front door unlocked because that's just how safe the town was. It never had a history of violence or any kind until now. The sheriff was scratching his head over Jasper's murder because there was no suspects that were apprehended and the deaths went unsolved, leaving the town in shambles as to why someone had killed a whole family, an axe murderer. From that day forward, the townspeople locked their doors, came in after dark, before dark. They brought guns in for protection to their homes, just in case the killer might stop by their town and do just what was done. And they weren't going to take any chances this time. A legend has it that if you travel down Bell Hollow Road, you can see a man on a horse with an axe in his hand, followed by a creepy laugh. Also, if you're brave enough to enter the bedroom where Abraham and his wife got the axe, you can see the ghosts of murders unravel in front of your eyes. But if Jasper gazes upon you, you better run as fast as you can out of the house, or you might get the axe like Abraham and his wife got, and that would be a real shame. You never know when Jasper may come back and want to spread evil to this town once again. The end. And that is the tale by Drac von Stoller. His tales, I like them because they are short, but still interesting enough to read. And yeah, I enjoyed them anyway. Thank you for listening to this story, and many blessings. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Happy October. Now we are on The Circus of the Dead by Drac von Stoller. You can find Drac von Stoller's collection on Google Play Books. They are completely free. They are only short stories, like bite-sized stories. They are absolutely perfect for reading in bed because by the time you've finished a couple, you're ready to go to sleep. So there's a really, really, really large collection of them also. A once thriving town called Doomsville was slowly moving into depression And since every other town around them had the economic funds to advance, the town of Doomsville was left to fend for themselves. Since money was running out as well as jobs, the townspeople started robbing and killing each other to survive in the depressed town. It was every man for himself. Friends quickly became enemies. The only entertainment the town of Doomsville had was a circus which brought in the majority of the town's money. But since the owner died while he was home trying to enjoy a quiet evening, turned quickly into a deadly one because one of his neighbours broke into his house looking for food and money. The circus owner wasn't the sharing type, so he was ordered to get on his knees and still wouldn't give in to the neighbour. And then the neighbour obviously put the end of the cold shotgun barrel against his face and blew his head right off his shoulders. The town cemetery was running out of places to bury their dead. Graves had to be dug up, but the coffins were stacked on top of one another as a solution. A businessman by the name of Jack Wilson, who was staying at a motel in Doomsville, paid a visit to the rundown circus, which brought back wonderful memories as a child when he used to go to the circus regularly in his hometown. He was saddened to see it going to ruin, so he had a brainstorm of an idea. He would invest the majority of his money he had set back for early retirement and bring this gem back to life once again and save the town from destruction. But he had no idea what he was getting himself into. Jack tried to find the owner to see if he would sell the abandoned circus to him, but was told the owner was dead, and the town of Doomsville was flat broke, and if he wanted it to take it. Jack didn't hesitate on jumping to the chance to bring back a childhood memory he longed for as an adult. But this dream would be shattered when a witch crossed his path. After a few months of hard work and thousands of dollars, Jack poured into the rundown circus. His dream became a short-lived reality. Jack was excited that the entertainment was no longer a memory of a forgotten past. But as he walked the grounds of the circus, he said, "Something is missing. Oh my, there are no circus performers. If I don't get some performers soon, I'm doomed, and so is this circus. Surely that shouldn't be a problem." But Jack wasn't aware that all the performers that worked at the circus were all buried at the cemetery. Jack was upset with himself for not planning things out a little better. He's in too deep, and money that he used from his first retirement account was spent on bringing the Doomsville circus back from the dead. Jack had no other funds to hire any performers for the entertainment. Jack felt like crap and went inside the big top tent and sat on the vacant bleachers looking around, saying to himself, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" Jack bent over and put his hands on his face, tearing up, prayed for a miracle. The miracle wasn't from the heavens above, but the depths of hell instead. All of a sudden, Jack heard a voice tell him his prayers were answered. Jack raised his eyes, wiped away the tears from his face. Standing directly in front of the bleachers was a witch dressed in black from head to toe. Jack said, "You're a witch. What could you possibly do for the problem that I'm facing at the moment?" "More than you'll ever know," laughed the witch. "Do you want me to help you or not?" asked the witch. "Yes, I need help desperately, and if I have to give you the deed to my house, I will," Jack said. "I don't need anything you have to offer," replied the witch. "Okay, well, let's get this party started," said Jack in a cheerful voice. Jack felt his prayers were answered, but he was in for a big surprise. The witch said some words. Jack had no idea what they meant, and then she vanished. One by one, Jack's circus performers started entering the tent, and Jack said, "What in the hell is going on here? You crazy witch! They're all dead!" Then the witch was hovering above the top of Jack as he sat frozen in fear as the dead circus performers the witch had conjured up from the Doomsville cemetery were coming his way. The witch laughed and said, "You wanted circus performers? You got them. So what if they're all dead? At least now you'll be able to get your circus up and run." Jack got off the bleachers and tried to escape from all the dead circus performers, but he was surrounded with nowhere to go. The witch was laughing hysterically at the dead circus performers as they got closer and closer until Jack fell to the ground and the dead circus performers tore Jack's poor body to shreds. Jack should have known that a town called Doomsville was terrible news, but his mind was too set on bringing a dead circus to life, living out his childhood fantasy that he was unaware that it would cost him his life in the end. It looks like Jack can haunt the circus with the rest of the dead circus performers for all eternity. The end. Thank you for listening to this episode of the story by Drak von Stoller. Many blessings. Hello, welcome back to my channel. Happy October. This story is called Stay Dead by Drak von